This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. The journey continues. The ring moves closer to Mordor, and the battle for Middle-earth begins. It's The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We're back into our summer series, jumping back into Lord of the Rings with The Two Towers, book 3 and 4 of book 2, if you're looking at it like a normal person. Book 3 and 4, if you're looking at it the way Tolkien sort of split it up into his 6-part series.
His creative vision.
Yes, his creative vision of 1 tome, 6 parts. This is book 3 and 4. And we're going to be talking about them. Jenna is not joining us in the studio this week.
Yeah, she wasn't able to make it
down to the studio, but it's okay. If you listened to our Harry Potter episodes, you kind of know how we do this. We're going to do it the exact same way and have her questions recorded and splice them in. So we still have all of her questions. We still get to do all that. That does mean, though, we won't have a Guess Who because she's not here to play. But well, there's only a couple new characters anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, we could do it with like Eowyn and Grima maybe, but it would be probably pretty obvious because it would only be new characters. And like one of them's a woman, one of them's a greasy old man. Like, I mean, there are more. There's Eomer and all this, but still, it's not a. And then Treebeard was one of them that I had. Yeah, there was a
pretty good extended description of Treebeard.
Yeah, I had the Treebeard description. I'm like, well, that'll be pretty obvious. But so we're not going to play Guess Who this time, unfortunately. But the plan is to have her back in studio for the third book, hopefully. Yes. That's the plan, because she's going to be down, so we're going to try to make that work. But in the meantime, we're still going to be able to do all of the rest of our segments, and we have plenty to get to, so no Guess Who isn't that big of a problem. Let's do a quick, let me sum up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
We didn't write anything for this. I'm just going to quickly summarize The Two Towers in case you haven't read it or watched it recently and you want a brief reminder. So here's what happens. Frodo and Sam set out on, this is a lightning speed round recap. Frodo and Sam set out on their journey to take the ring to Mordor on their own. That's where we left them at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are pursuing Merry and Pippin, who have been kidnapped by Uruk-hai and who are being taken to
Isengard.
Taking the hobbits to Isengard. They're pursuing them. We'll kind of bounce back and forth here. The main storyline, or the more interesting storyline to some extent, is the Aragorn and company run into the Riders of Rohan, realize that the Riders of Rohan killed the Uruk-hai that were taking Merry and Pippin, but Merry and Pippin are nowhere to be found. They at first think they had died, to in fact realize they survived and escaped into Fangorn Forest, where Merry and Pippin run into Treebeard and begin their relationship with Treebeard, have a discussion with him. In the movie, they try to convince him to go to war with Isengard and to take down Saruman. They have an Entmoot. We cut back. Frodo and Sam, meanwhile, are traveling through Emyn Muil, I believe, through the rocky terrain, having some troubles mountain climbing and whatnot. They needed Alex Honnold there. That's a climbing reference for anybody. Deep cut climbing reference for any of our climbing people out there. They end up capturing Gollum, who's stalking them. They capture him, they take him, and they say, "Hey, promise on the ring, you're going to lead us to Mordor or to the Black Gate because we got to get into Mordor." He goes, "Sure, we'll do that." They head out on their way through the Dead Marshes. Some stuff happens there, nothing super interesting. See some stuff. Cut back. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas now meet back up in the woods that they're looking for Merry and Pippin. Meet up with, whoa, surprise, Gandalf. He's alive. He's Gandalf the White now. He goes, hey, let's go back. They're fine. I saw them yesterday. Merry and Pippin are fine. Let's go back to Edoras. We'll talk to Theoden. You need to talk to Theoden. They go back there, talk to him. They're like, hey, the Saruman's coming. He's going to come kill you. After Gandalf goes all exorcism on Theoden, kicks Scream out. they're like, well, Saruman's going to come kill you. So they're like, let's run, let's go. We got to do something about it. And Theoden's like, well, let's go to Helm's Deep. And they're like, oh, not a great idea, but okay, fine. Again, then we'll talk about the differences there. They run to Helm's Deep. Big Helm's Deep battle. They get attacked by 10,000 Uruk-hai. 300 men stand against 10,000 Uruk-hai. They raid out. They have a glorious thing. Gandalf returns with Eomer, saves the day. Fantastic. That's the end of that storyline. They defeated the Uruk-hai army, and Rohan will live for another day. Cut back to Merry and Pip. They don't convince initially the Treants to go to war against Isengard and Saruman, but they tricks Treebeard into walking past Isengard on the way home, and he's like, whoa, look at all this bad stuff he did, let's fight him. And then they go into war, they defeat Saruman, all the Ents defeat Saruman, they cleanse Isengard with the waters of the Entwash, I believe. And that storyline wraps up. Saruman is defeated, basically. Okay, cool. And then cutting back to Frodo and Sam, they run into Faramir, Boromir's brother. He takes him, is like, hey, you got the ring? We should probably take you to Gondor because we could use that thing. Take him down to Osgiliath. Ultimately decides, no, never mind. I'm going to let you go. Lets him go. And then Frodo and Sam journey on to their, because I skipped it, but they were going to go in the Black Gate. Gollum's like, this is a bad idea. Don't go in the Black Gate. I got a better idea. The place that's a better idea is the Stairs of Cirith Ungol, which is where they're traveling. At the end of this movie, they're heading to Cirith Ungol, and we know that she lives there, and she's going to help Gollum get the ring back. We don't know who she is yet, but that's where our story and our tale ends in this movie. And that's your recap of The Two Towers.
And there is a bit more in the book. There's some stuff at the end of the book.
We should say that here.
That they moved into Return of the King. So we're going to hold off on talking about that stuff.
We stopped a couple chapters early in both Book 3 and Book 4, which are the two parts of Two Towers, because they both go a few chapters beyond where this movie ends. Mm-hmm. And we could have done that last time as well. Or, we could have read forward a couple chapters, probably would have made sense because we knew the movie was the first couple chapters of Two Towers, but that's fine. Or that Fellowship ended with the first couple chapters of Two Towers. We didn't do that, but we thought maybe this time it would make sense so we don't forget what happened in those chapters when we get to Return of the King eventually. So we stopped on Flotsam and Jetsam in Book 3, which is where we go see where everybody goes and sees what's up with Isengard, Gandalf and everybody. So we stopped there because that's kind of where this movie ends. And then in the Frodo and Sam storyline, we stopped where they are heading to Cirith Ungol because that is where this movie ends.
At the crossroads.
At the crossroads, Journey to the Crossroads, at the end of that chapter, I believe. Because after that, we actually get to Shelob's lair in this book, and that is not in this movie. It is in Return of the King. So we'll save that for Return of the King. It also made us to read a little bit less this time, which was helpful. But anyways, all right. Now we're all caught up. If you haven't watched them or seen them recently, let's move on to our first segment, real segment. What's that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
Like the Fellowship, the podcast has broken up a little bit. I am speaking from my home in St. Louis. Hopefully the audio isn't too bad. It is really hard to find a quiet place in this house because either there is AC going, there's a dog clacking around, or there are fish filters constantly going. So hopefully I don't sound too bad. So first question is, do Sam and Frodo almost get busted as soon as they make it to the Black Gate?
No. They do. They go to the Black Gate, all the same. Gollum takes them there because that's where they ask him to take him. And he's like, all right, fine, if you say so. They get there. In the book, they just see it. Gollum says, hey, I got a better way, and they leave, basically. In the movie, they add a little wrinkle where Sam falls off the cliff and is almost seen. And so this sequence where they almost get caught is not in the movie or not in the book. And it's not a favorite movie ad of mine, mainly because the way it's edited seems very clear to me that these people would have seen The Hobbits. It's edited weirdly and poorly, I feel like. And now you can maybe argue that they're trying to show the elven magic of the cloaks, but it's not. I get it at the end where they're covered up with the cloak and they can't see him, and like then they reveal like that. I get that that's what they're going for in this moment, is to kind of remind us how cool these cloaks are and that they're like super camouflaging. But there's moments where they're clearly just running down the hill in broad daylight, and then we cut back to the soldiers and they're looking at the hill, and I'm like, what is happening? You know what I mean? It's just very confusing and seems like they're obviously looking at them, and it doesn't really add. There's a little bit of tension that maybe they just felt this needed because it's like the Black Gate or something. I already thought the scene was effective enough on its own. Didn't think it needed this extra little bit. Again, it's a reminder for the cloaks, but they don't really play a major role later in the. From what I remember, they don't play like a huge role that we needed to be reminded about. But whatever. I'm not a huge fan of it because, again, I think it's just kind of clumsily done in the movie. But it's not in the book. So
next question: how do Sam and Frodo meet up with Gollum in the book?
It's pretty similar. He's creeping down on them, but in the book, he actually slips and falls onto them while they're listening to him sneak up on them.
Yeah, he's like talking, and it's similar in the movie, but they're like listening and they're talking amongst. They're like, does he know that we can hear him? It's kind of like the conversation, and he actually just slips and falls off the cliff, which I thought was funny.
Yeah,
like and then they grab him. In the movie, it's like, haha! They like surprise. They like know he's coming, and they like surprise grab him, and he's not expecting it. But it is vaguely, it's basically the same. It's just a slight tweak on that.
Does Faramir see the ring the first time that he meets Frodo?
Faramir does not see the ring the first time he meets Frodo. In fact, Faramir does not know, and I think this is a kind of changed for all of them. He does not know what Isildur's Bane is. Initially, he doesn't even know that Frodo has Isildur's Bane. He doesn't know why he's there. Frodo kind of comes out and explains, I'm Frodo, I'm coming this way. I set out with Aragorn and all these people and Boromir, and that all plays out similarly in the movie. But he eventually figures out that he has a weapon, or that it's Isildur's Bane, but Faramir doesn't actually know that that's the ring. In the book, he's like, Isildur's Bane, wait, I don't know what it is. He said, because he even says like, well, we know he was killed by arrows, but we doubt that Isildur's Bane is a bow and arrow.
Yeah.
And so they don't know it's a ring, or at least he doesn't know it's a ring. In the movie, it's very clear that he says Isildur's Bane in a conversation with Boromir in the flashback. He's like, Isildur's Bane, the one ring. And it's like, well, okay, so they do, in the movie, they know what it is. But in the book, it's actually funny. Sam drunkenly, or at least tipsily, lets slip that that it is the ring that Frodo has. They've been wined and dined, and Sam is chit chatting, and he lets slip to Faramir that he does have that the thing that Frodo is carrying is a ring, and then Faramir realizes it's the ring because they know he's aware of the ring, and it just doesn't put it together necessarily right away. So no, he's not doesn't see the ring on Frodo when they meet initially.
Does Faramir then take the ring and Frodo/Sam back to Osgiliath?
Absolutely, he does not. Movie Faramir is maybe one of the biggest changes from the book, and possibly not for the better in this particular case.
I would think definitely not for the better, in my opinion. I get it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So more on that later.
Yeah.
But they do not go to Osgiliath.
No, yeah, we'll have a lot more on that later, and more on a lot of these things coming up. But they don't go to Osgiliath with the ring, and Faramir's. We'll talk about Faramir.
Yeah. Does the book have a pretty balanced narrative between the multiple party perspectives now that the Fellowship has split up? Like, do they go back and forth every other chapter, or is it a pretty concrete, streamlined narrative?
They absolutely do not, and it is so much better in the movie. This is one of the best things the movie does is bounce back and forth between Frodo and Sam and the Broken Fellowship.
Yeah.
The book is, the way the books work is book 3, which is the first half of Two Towers, is the Fellowship, is Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, Merry, Pippin, their adventures. It does bounce back and forth between Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Merry and Pippin.
A little bit.
Little bit. It goes back and forth between their stories, but then we don't get anything of Frodo and Sam until book 4, the second half, and then it's all Frodo and Sam, and we get nothing of the Broken Fellowship. It's very, like, the way they do it in the movie makes perfect sense, and it's very obvious, but I'm super glad they did, but that is not how it plays out in the book, and it's not for the better that the book doesn't do that.
Fellowship of the Ring seemed to speed up the timeline and plot quite a bit. Is this the same case in the Two Towers?
It's actually less so in this case than it was in Fellowship. Things start to move faster in the book, and the movie follows along mostly in time with what the book is doing. So, for instance, it's only been about 2 weeks from Sam and Frodo leaving the Fellowship to where they end in this book.
I think, from what I remember, it's roughly in the ballpark of 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it hasn't been that long.
It has not been long, because at one point they say, when they're at some point after the Dead Marshes, they say like it's been less than a fortnight since we left took that canoe across the river or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so and then all being said, it's probably less than a month total from leaving the Fellowship to where they are at the end of this book, whereas in the first book it's been, I mean, from where the book starts to where the book ends, it's been 20 years or whatever, or something like that.
Yeah.
But even just the journey in the first book is months or something, like, because they spend weeks and weeks, if not months, at Rivendell,
right.
and weeks and weeks, if not months, before he leaves.
It takes him forever to get from the Shire to Rivendell.
That takes several weeks or a couple months or something like that. This one, they're moving pretty quickly because they're just traveling. And they're also not going quite as great distances. Mm-hmm. The distance from where they are at the end of book 1 to where they end up here is not nearly as far as it is from like the Shire to Rivendell to down the river. So it's sped up quite a bit. And it seems to me, the vibe I got is the movie followed along pretty closely. We have several instances where Aragorn or something will mention that they've been running for 5 days chasing Merry and Pippin. Mm-hmm. And that's the same in the book. They've been chasing the orcs for like 4 or 5 days. So it feels pretty similar to me.
Did Treebeard actually stomp that mega nasty orc that tried to kill Merry and Pippin?
Treebeard does not stomp a mega nasty orc. It's unfortunate, because that is a sweet moment, but that is not in the book. The orc is dispatched. All of the orcs and Uruk-hai are dispatched before they make it into the woods. Potatoes.
Okay, I got that out of my system. I really just wanted to drop the iconic line, but I guess for question's sake, do they really take a potato lunch break?
Yes, potatoes. They don't have any potatoes, much like in the movie, but that line is from the book. However, boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew is a movie ad.
Yeah, that part of it, the second half, the second iconic half.
So they took something iconic and they added to it to make it even more iconic.
Yeah.
Ha! Great point, Katie. Man, that was sure a funny thing that I definitely did hear with both my 2 ears.
And that whole conversation is pretty much identical, where it leads in with Gollum saying, "Taters, what is taters, precious?" That's right out of the book. And then Sam's response is, this first part's the same and then different. And then Sam says, I could make fried fish and chips that not even you could turn down. And he goes, "Yes, I could," or something like, it's the exact same response. So it is very similar. But boil and mash them, sticking them in a stew, not in the book.
And now for the next question. Is Elrond really that against Arwen and Aragorn's marriage in the book?
This isn't in the books at all. The Arwen Aragorn, we talked about it a little bit last time.
Yeah.
It's mentioned in the appendices. There's a little bit of vague mention of the fact that there's something between Aragorn and Arwen in the first book, and they share a glance and blah blah blah, and he's talking to but there's we have no scenes together. There's none of that, and so it continues in this book. There is nothing with Elrond discussing his contempt for their relationship or any of that. Again, there may be in the appendices, which we may read some of at some point and discuss and talk more about, but it is not in these books. Or in these first 2 books, and from what I understand, it's not in the main books at all. So
not that I remember.
Yeah.
Can Arwen and Aragorn actually communicate via each other's dreams?
They cannot.
I think.
I don't think. Again, that could be in the appendices if they can. Although I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a dream.
I'm not sure about this because I initially thought it was. She says you're dreaming or something like that. Yeah. Wake up or whatever. But then at the end of this scene, she says, "How long until you leave?" or something. And it looks to me like he's wearing the gear he was wearing when they left Rivendell the first time, or, in Fellowship.
Yeah.
And it made me think, maybe this is a memory he's having.
Right. He's
of when he left. And I don't know for sure which way it is, because I did read it the same way of like them somehow dream communicating.
Yeah, like mind melding.
Yeah, I actually did think that was the case when when you first watch it. But then, and maybe this is the extended cut. And she watched the extended cut, I think, didn't she?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. But in the extended cut, this scene's a little bit longer. And I think it becomes very clear that yeah, this is a memory of an interaction they had. And she's talking about him dreaming in that moment because he was taking a nap or something, it seems like. Yeah. So it's a little bit different, or not different. I think that's the case, but I'm not hard and fast on that because I don't know for sure.
All right. And then on top of that, does Ghost Arwen show up and like kiss Aragorn back to life in the river?
Alas, no. Also, there's no way that the original idea for this scene wasn't a smash cut from Arwen kissing him to the horse like licking his face. There's no, because it almost is that. She's like kisses him, and then we cut to a wider shot with the horse walks up and starts nodding him. But that is like, I mean, think about any like romantic comedy or whatever. That is a classic like silly comedy
like dreaming
cut where they're dreaming
and the dog is licking
their face.
Yeah.
There's no way, and with Peter Jackson's background in sort of schlocky B movies, there's no way that wasn't the original idea. And they're like, guys, this is a little bit too serious of a moment for that. But it's almost that anyways, but there's no way that wasn't originally what they were going for. But also that's not in the book.
Moving on from that, really, really hope this one is in the book. But the best horse of all time that rescues Aragorn, is he even mentioned in the book?
Brago? Is it
Brago, yeah.
Brago is not mentioned in the books.
Yeah.
Aragorn rides Asfaloth.
I think that's his name. There's those two horses that they give him.
They get two horses from the riders
Éomer,
of Rohan.
And he says them in the movie too, and they're the same names. It's like it's like Hasselhoff. I don't remember, but there's the two horses. He's riding one of those, and that's what he rides throughout the movie, or throughout the book. Sorry, as much as I remember. And I looked this up just to double check to make sure he doesn't get Brago like in Return of the King or something. And from what I could read on like the wiki, Brago is a completely made up for the movie ad in terms of this specific horse. But apparently Brago is named after a former king of Rohan, like in the Silmarillion or something. He's mentioned.
Horse.
Yeah. But no, he is the goodest horse. He's a good horse boy, but not in the book.
All right, another thing that I really hope is not just a figment of Peter Jackson's imagination, but the dwarf roasting between the riders of Rohan and Gimli. I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood a little bit higher from the ground.
The dwarf roasting is in the book. It's iconic and it's almost identical. That whole interaction between when Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli first meet the Rohirrim and Éomer, almost verbatim, like line for line. There's a lot more in the book, but all of the highlights from that scene in the movie are straight out of the book, tweaked a little bit here and there. But specifically, I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground, is absolutely in the book. And Legolas's response of "you would die before your stroke fell." I don't know if he says that, but he pulls his bow out on him in the book. So,
is what happens to Wormtongue basically the same in the book?
It's pretty similar. One big difference, though, in the movie they just toss him out, but in the book they actually give Wormtongue the opportunity to choose if he wants to leave or if he wants to fight for Rohan and try to redeem himself, but he nopes the heck out.
Yeah, they're like, and I thought it was really interesting because I remember in the movie he just kind of like runs away, like Theoden almost kills him and then he just kind of runs. And then in the book I was like, oh, that's not exactly. They're like, give him a chance to redeem himself. Come fight with us. And I'm like, really? You gotta trust him to come fight with you?
Guy around?
And also, and again, it was probably a little bit, my idea of him was probably a little bit colored by the movie version where he's not a fighter. Like he doesn't come across like he can as a guy who's gonna do much on the
sword.
On the battlefield for you. So I was like, that's weird, but okay.
Okay, more dwarf talk. Is the dwarf woman talk and the beard talk between Gimli and Éowyn in the book?
Alas, no. I'm going for a movie amount of alasses here, by the way. But no, the dwarf talk, or the talk of female dwarves and their beards between Gimli and Éowyn and Aragorn does not take place in the book. That is a moment of levity added for the movie.
And then speaking of Éowyn, is this like unrequited romance between her and Aragorn even mentioned?
Éowyn is super thirsty for Aragorn, and why wouldn't you be? I mean, who can blame her? But they don't really have any scenes together in the book. No.
They might have one. This is one I was going to go back and double check, and I couldn't remember for sure. They may have a scene or two where they like talk a little, but it's nothing like the movie where they have like extended like conversations and like moments together at all. It's more so like she. Most of what we get about their sort of her thirst for him is a description of her longing looks at him. Yeah. Like basically, she's like, "Ooh, who is this handsome fellow?" Like that's the extent of what Tolkien wrote. You know, about this female's perspective is this man's handsome. But
well, at least he didn't try to dwell in it.
That's fair enough. But the romance it's alluded to. There may be more in Return to the King, at least from her perspective in the book. It's alluded to the fact that she's into him. It may go more in the book. The movie in the third book, the second book doesn't have much not nearly as much as the movie does in terms of like putting in this love triangle thing that's going on now between him and Éowyn, and
ramps that up.
Yeah.
And the elf army at Helm's Deep, is it there, or is that just for cool action sequences?
There are 0 elves at Helm's Deep in the book. No. Sorry.
No. There is at least one.
You're right. I screwed that up. I wrote that answer and I didn't even think about it. There's 1 elf at Helm's Deep. Sorry, Legolas. And there's an Aragorn's Numenor, which is like... He's a Numenor, which is they're somewhat descendant from a similar bloodline at some point or something, I think, which is why he lives a long time. I don't know. But anyways, no, the company of elves who show up, Haldir and his company of elves that show up to help them in the movie does not happen in the book. There is, however, a line that I feel very confident was what inspired this moment.
Yes.
Is that Legolas says, "What I wouldn't give for a company of elven archers." Like when they're kind of going over their battle plans and then like the men they have and whatever. And I think it's very obvious that they were like, well, let's do that.
Yeah, Peter Jackson read that and was like, you know what?
That's a good idea,
Me
Legolas. That's a good idea, Legolas. And we'll also, I think, and we can just do it now. I'll speculate I think the main reason this is added is, one, we get to see some elves fight. It's cool, whatever. And again, it kind of adds some more interesting political dynamics between, you know, because when Haldir shows up with them, he says like an allegiance once stood between elves and men. I'm here to renew that allegiance or whatever, kind of setting up the greater themes of working together between the different groups and species and peoples and that sort of thing. And it's not a bad idea. It doesn't make a lot of sense time-wise in terms of like how they got their win, how they knew, like maybe just hand wave it away with Galadriel. Like it's Galadriel, she knew and sent them.
Oh,
like,
that's 100% why they showed her.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, and that is why they show up in the movie. They're like, Galadriel sent us, but it's like, well, how did she know? Okay, whatever, fine, doesn't matter. Maybe Gandalf, sure. He sent Gwai here, the Eagle Lord, and
she looked in her magic.
Yeah, maybe she looked in her magic thing. But those are things, some things that are, and some things that will not be, and some things that were, and who knows?
Better safe than sorry.
That's true. She just, you're not wrong. There's a million ways you could explain how they knew. Still think they get there a little quick from what it seems like they're supposed to be coming in the movie or in the book, and like how far it is. It doesn't matter. But they're absolutely mainly there in the movie to give us a named and death.
Yes.
In this big epic battle that has been built up throughout the course of the movie throughout the course of the second and third act of the movie as like, This is the big battle. This is we're super outnumbered. We have no chance. This is doom. And then none of our heroes die. So it's like, was it doom? So they're like, well, we gotta get somebody who can die. Haldir's not gonna do anything. He's not important. We know him from the first movie at least. Let's send him over there, I think, is the idea. I think that's why one of the main reasons that happens.
Speaking of cool action sequences, does Legolas shield surf down the stairs?
This is my favorite part of the book, actually. No. Alas.
I was like, a favorite part of the book? Yeah.
Legolas does not shield surf in Helm's Deep.
You know what would be fun is to write in Tolkien's style that moment. And like Tolkien's like sort of like high elevated prose, and then it just drops into, and then Legolas grabs an orc shield off the ground and does a sick grind down the stairs, just rail gunning arrows at orcs and kills like 8 of them, and it's super sick, bro. Like, it's like what? Okay. Although there is a lot of things that I didn't expect to have been in the book that are, and there's even some in this movie that we'll talk about later that felt very clearly like they were added for the movie that weren't. But this one, you can tell like this is not a thing in the book. So yeah, no sweet shield slide, but it is a great moment.
It is.
One of the ones I'm looking forward to find out with Return of the King, because I never got this far when I've read them, is if he takes down an entire Oliphant, an entire Mumuk by himself.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of this moment of Return of the King. Like
this Legolas sliding, doing cool shit.
Yeah, the Legolas doing ridiculous stuff. So I'm interested to see if that happens in Return of the King, but we'll get there when we get there. That's it for Was That in the Book. Let's move on to Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So now I'm going to move on to Lost in Adaptation, and I just have a couple questions for this one. One of them is, does the book go into more or some different details as to what really happened to Gandalf, or what kind of the deal with Gandalf the White is?
Not really. I could go back and look at this, and I probably should. But there's not a lot more detail about Gandalf's transformation from Gandalf. And do you recall much in terms of...
I mean, it's Tolkien, so there's more like flowery...
It's a lot of flowery, like... And it's not too dissimilar from the movie in like time...
Yeah.
Blah, blah, yeah, that sort of thing. But it's, from what I can recall, it's pretty similar.
It's the same basic like chain of events, if I'm remembering right.
The one thing that is different, that is mentioned in the book that we don't get in the movie, and I was paying attention to see if this happened, is that we find out that how he got off the mountain, which we don't find out in the movie, because we just kind of see him floating through white space in the movie. He's at King's Cross Station at the end of book 7. But naked, floating through white space. In the movie, or in the book, we find out that he gets off the top of the mountain, which that whole battle plays out similarly. He gets off the top of the mountain, but because Galadriel sent Gwai here, the Lord of the Eagles or whatever, the Eagle Lord, the same one that saved him from the top of Orthanc in Fellowship of the Ring, Galadriel sends him to look for Gandalf, and he finds him on top of the mountain and grabs him and takes him off. So that's how he gets off the mountain, and that's not in the movie. But I don't think there's much more mentioned. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to double check it and see if I can find this moment. Okay, this is all we get in the book, and it's basically exactly what happens in the movie. This is the battle on top of the mountain. Those that looked up from afar thought the mountain was crowned with storm. Thunder they heard, and lightning, they said, smote upon Celebdil, and leaped back, broken into tongues of fire. Is that not enough? A great smoke rose about us, vapor and steam. Ice fell like rain. I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place and broke the mountainside where it smote in it his ruin. Then darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time, and I wandered far on roads that I will not tell. Naked, I was sent back for a brief time until my task is done, and naked I lay upon the mountaintop. The tower was behind us, crumbling into dust, the window gone, the ruined stair was choked with burned and broken stone. I was alone, forgotten, without escape upon the hard horn of the world. There I lay staring upward, while the stars wheeled over, and each day was as long as a life age of the earth.
That's so dramatic.
So yeah, that's basically what he says in the movie, is like, I passed out of time, and then I returned. So
pretty much.
That's all we get in the book. It's more of that. So
man, that was a really great explanation, Brian. I'm sure glad that I'm sitting right next to you in the studio. That way I can listen to your golden honey voice. Okay, and finally, I kind of assumed not, but I thought I'd ask. Is Éowyn as developed as a character in the book? Does it kind of explain or maybe go into more detail as to where she learned her skills in general badassery?
No. We don't really get anything more on Éowyn. The movie actually goes into more detail than the book does. I think it is mentioned.
I couldn't remember this. Do you remember this?
I'm pretty sure it's mentioned, or somebody calls her a shield maiden at some point in the book. But we don't really get any backstory other than like her general upbringing.
Yeah, we find out that she's the nephew or the niece of Theoden, and that she's Éomer's sister, and they're the niece and nephew of Theoden, who's the king. Yeah, but that's about it. We don't have a scene where they're training with a sword, swinging a sword around or anything like that.
She is trusted within Edoras, and Theoden actually leaves the city under her management when they go off to the Helm's Deep.
Yeah, in the book, it's slightly different. They're going off to war to fight Saruman and Isengard.
Decide to go to
eventually
Helm's
go to Helm's Deep, but they don't take everybody out of Edoras in the book.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about that more later. But they leave people there and just take like the army basically. And he leaves. He needs all the men he can take, and they're like, "Well, you should just leave Eowyn in charge. She's like handy, like she's she
knows what she's doing.
She knows what she's doing. So she's like respected and like, but we don't get a lot of her backstory and or why she's or even if she's like a badass with a sword, we have no idea.
But we know she is a capable lady.
She's a capable lady and trusted by the men of Rohan. So,
all right. So I think that concludes my segment for today. Like the King, I will be returning in about a month to finish out the Lord of the Rings trilogy with these guys. Until then, I don't really have anything to plug again. I guess just be sure to go out and support your local PBS station. All right, guys, have a good one.
All right, that was it for Lost in Adaptation. Let's move on and really get deep and dirty and better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right, first thing first, we're going to talk a little bit, and we'll do this. So this is going to be a little confusing. I want to preface all of these segments. Better in the book, better in the movie, and movie nailed it. We're going to not super go in the order that the movie does. We are, but so we're going to go in the order the book goes, which is we're going to talk about all of the storyline with Aragorn and them. And then we're going to go back and talk about all of the storyline with Frodo and Sam, because that's how our book notes are.
Right. So we do the book notes first, so that's kind of how things are organized, and then we fill in with our movie notes as we're watching the movie.
So we'll bounce around a little bit.
Yeah.
But generally we're going book order, which is Helm's Deep storyline and then Frodo and Sam storyline.
Yes.
So going off of that, we're going to talk a little bit in each segment about the end of Fellowship of the Ring, because those chapters are in the very beginning of Two Towers. And so we're going to talk about a couple things, including this, which is the Boromir's farewell, the departure of Boromir, as the chapter is called. I actually like the conversation in the book. The movie's really good, and it's incredibly well acted, and it's every time I get choked up when they go back and forth. But I really like some of the moments in the book version that they didn't. I think this might be mentioned in the movie, but Boromir actually confesses to him. Does he confess to him? Yeah, he does in the movie. He confesses that he tried to take the ring. But he says to Aragorn, "Farewell, Aragorn, go to Minas Tirith and save my people. I have failed." "No," said Aragorn, taking his hand and kissing his brow. "You have conquered. If you have gained such a victory, be at peace. Minas Tirith shall not fail." Boromir smiled. And then Aragorn says, "Which way did they go? Was Frodo there?" But Boromir did not speak again. It's pretty similar, and it's not much longer. There's more I skipped up in the top half of that. But I like Aragorn's sentiment to him there, and he says a similar thing in the movie. I guess it's pretty similar. I actually don't know which version I like more now. This note I wrote so long ago that I don't recall what it meant, because when I looked at this, it just says that the conversation is a bit longer and better. I don't know if I meant in the book or in the movie. I might have meant in the movie. So scratch this potentially. I'm going to leave it in here, and you can
make up your own mind.
But I thought one of them was better, and now I can't remember which, because it's been so long since we watched that movie and since I read the conversation. So
I know we have to have the extra time in between to read these books, but we run some risks.
Yeah, there are some risks, especially with where they overlap, which is why one of the reasons that we stopped where we get through this time, so that we don't have that big long gap between when we read Shelob's Lair and then when we watch it a month from now. So anyways.
So I like in the book that they put all of the weapons of the orcs that Boromir killed in the boat.
I thought that was an interesting little thing that the movie doesn't. If they do it, I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
And it's specifically mentioned in the book because he slays all of these orcs, or Uruk-hai technically, and they gather up all of their swords and put them on the boat with them. Like, yep, good job. I was like, that's badass. Like, that's cool. I just thought that was a cool thing. And it's mentioned in the book. This is a great moment in the book that's not in the movie, is when they run into Eomer. They're talking about where they've all been. They're recapping their adventures, and they say we were in Lothlorien and we talked to Galadriel, and Eomer's like, "Ooh, don't trust that lady of the wood," or whatever. "She's a crafty wench." It's not what he says, but he says something. He speaks ill of her, and I love this. Gimli comes at him and was like, "Hey, man, you don't even know her." And Eomer immediately apologizes and says, I'm sorry for speaking ill. I would gladly learn better. And I was like, you know what, people? Be like Éomer. Everybody in the world, just take a note from Éomer.
Refreshing and unproblematic.
Right? It is like the least problematic element in everything ever. But it's so amazing because it's just like, he just immediately is like, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. I would like to learn more. It's like, yes, Éomer. Get him, bud. Look at you. Admitting your lack of knowledge and wanting to learn from somebody who has a lived experience better, that it more relevantly applies to the situation than you. Be like Éomer, man.
And also Gimli, a true ally.
Yeah, right?
Calling out toxicity.
Yeah, right? Oh, I love it.
Hey, man.
It's so great. It's such a little moment in the book, but I was like, holy shit. Look at woke Tolkien over here. I mean, not really, but
Yeah,
so
not
many
really,
problems. But that little moment in context I thought was really great.
So elves apparently sleep with their eyes open.
Yeah, it's mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
I don't know if we ever see Legolas sleep, to be fair.
I guess it's never
In the
mentioned.
movie. And it's never mentioned.
Yeah.
But one thing we do see in Return of the King, we do see Gandalf sleeping with his eyes open. I remember this, where he has the Palantir,
Yeah.
and Merry goes over to get the Palantir, and Gandalf's eyes are open. And so Gandalf sleeps with his eyes open. I don't know, and that's not mentioned in the book, at least not yet. But Legolas, or the elves, Legolas sleeps with his eyes open.
That's so creepy.
It's so weird and creepy. But yeah, that's in the book, and there's a little detail that I thought was really funny. Another fun thing from the end of Fellowship, the movie, is when Merry and Pippin are captured at the end of in the beginning of this book. It's mentioned that Merry cuts off several arms of orcs that are or Uruk-hai that are attacking them and trying to grab them. It's a mention that he cuts off a couple of arms, which I was like, why is that not in the movie? Why is Merry not slicing off a couple arms that are trying to grab him in the movie? They just kind of pick them up and they're like, oh no, and they get carried away.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, come on. That would be so great if he got to slice a few arms off, but all right, whatever.
Orc medicine is... We see it in the movie.
We see it in the movie, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
That's a deleted scene for sure.
Yeah.
But...
or orc drink or something.
Draught or whatever, however that's pronounced.
But apparently orc medicine is like a wonder drug.
It works very well, but I think it's implied. What I thought was interesting, because they give some to Merry because he's sick, and Pippin because they're not, they're injured and they're tired and whatever. And after they get it in the book, they're able to, Pippin's inner monologue is like, wow, I can actually run, and it revitalized me. But it's also, I think, kind of implied similar to alcohol or something, where he feels the wear of it on him over time. It's not like a without its problems, but it actually works really well which I thought was just an interesting, these orcs came up with a really effective some sort of, draft of some sort, because a lot of times we don't see them being, especially in the movies, and even in the books, we don't spend much time with them.
But yeah, we don't know anything about
their culture or how they're always just portrayed as completely idiotic, pure animalistic.
Yeah, they're foot soldiers.
Yeah,
they're just that's all they do.
Yeah, and they're stupid, and but it seems that they have their own thing going on, and I just thought that was an interesting little detail. In the book, and it is like you said, it does actually show up in the movie, but they don't comment on it. And it does work because they drink it and then Merry comes to or whatever, but they don't really comment on it very much. But anyways, one of the things that happens in the book is when they're after they get Merry and Pippin get dropped and the Rohan or the Rohirrim are attacking or whatever, and they crawl away. The orc Grishnak or whatever his name is, I believe it is, comes over to him, and they talk him into untying them and taking them himself by convincing them that they have the ring, basically, or that they have whatever the thing is that Saruman's looking for. And one of the ways Pippin does this is he starts pretending to be Gollum, imitating Gollum and saying "my precious" and doing this act to convince the orc that he has the ring or whatever, which I thought was kind of an interesting little plot detail that's not in the movie at all.
A great line from Treebeard.
Yeah.
I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty.
Yeah, which that's not in the movie, and I was like, oh, what? Come on. Greybeard or Treebeard being a fucking jerk is great. It's pretty good. Yeah, because he says, because it's responding to Pippin, who says, "This shaggy old forest looked so different in the sunlight. I almost felt I liked this place." And Treebeard, "Almost felt you liked the forest? That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you. I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty." It's a great line. Treebeard is also, and this is not mentioned in the movie, he goes by Treebeard, but he also goes by Fangorn, and then his real name is too long and convoluted to say. So neither of these are his real names. They're just what people call him, similar to Gandalf, probably. But I didn't realize that he is Fangorn. That the Fangorn Forest is named after him.
Yeah.
Like, it's his forest. He is Fangorn, and Fangorn Forest is his forest. And the movie doesn't mention that at all, but I thought that was an interesting fact that, he is Fangorn.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. His vocal patterns, or else us probably should have gone in the movie, nailed it.
The movie nailed it. This should
in
be
the wrong place.
Yeah.
But the vocal patterns are on point.
Just move this in your head to the movie nailed it. But yeah, the hurum or what, barum, barum, all the low. And when we were watching the movie, it was like very obvious to us. Oh yeah, we mentioned in the prequel episode that neither of us realized that Treebeard was voiced by John Rhys Davies, who plays Gimli. We watched it this time. We're like, oh. Yeah,
it was immediately like, how have I never noticed that?
Very clearly John Rhys Davies. Very clearly. I'm pretty glad that Treebeard doesn't sing in the movie.
Yeah.
But I do like that Pippin helps him write a new lyric about hobbits, because he has a song about all of the creatures of the world, and his song does not have hobbits in it. And so they have to add a line, and Pippin helps him.
Like, why don't we just write a new one? We'll help you out here.
Yeah. So they're discussing at one point, Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas are discussing what they're going to do if they find... They're trying to track down Merry and Pippin in Fangorn Forest. And Gimli, they're talking about how they don't have any supplies. They don't have any food. And Gimli says... I think it's a great line. He just goes, "Well, if we ever do find them, we'll show them we'll show them our true friendship by sitting down and starving next to them," or something like that. Which I was like, that sounds like that's a real Gimli line from the movie. Yeah. Like, it feels like a really Gimli line, and I was surprised it wasn't in the movie, because it's sort of his classic, like, gruff, like, making light of dark situations, but like also kind of being like, well, this is stupid. Like, he's like, what are we doing? We'll just go sit and starve with them, I guess. And Aragorn being the true hero that he is, says, and if that's what we must do, that's what we will do. It's like, okay, Aragorn, right, great.
Calm down.
Yeah.
Gandalf, savage motherfucker.
Yeah.
There's the line, is it Aragorn who says...
Aragorn says, one thing about you has not...
riddles.
This is after he comes back as Gandalf the White and they meet him. He says, one thing about you hasn't changed. You still speak in riddles.
Yeah. And then Gandalf is like, no, I was talking out loud to myself. A habit of the old is that they choose the wisest person present to speak to.
Yeah.
Z-snap.
Alrighty then, Gandalf. Calm down, bud. Yeah, basically. He's just like, yeah, no, man, I was talking to myself because I'm smarter than you. All right, cool. I thought this was interesting in the book, and that doesn't really get touched on in the movie, is there's a discussion, and this may actually be in that deleted scene now, I can't recall. There's a deleted scene in the movie that we watched where Gandalf and Aragorn sit and discuss what's happening after they meet with him. And they're talking about everything. And in that scene in the book, Gandalf says Sauron for sure thinks that we're taking the ring to Isengard or to Gondor, because that's what he would do.
Yeah.
And he basically it gives us a little moment of delving into the psyche of Sauron, and it's kind of similar to like the Voldemort thing, where his arrogance and his pride and what his lust for power is his downfall. He expects them to use this ring to try to go to war with him, and he doesn't remotely suspect that they would take the ring and destroy it.
That is mentioned in the movie.
Yeah, and I think it's that scene, yeah.
But we don't really delve as deeply into it as the book does.
They don't go into the psyche of Sauron as much as they do in the book. But yeah, you're right. That scene, and that's a deleted scene, which is why I didn't remember that it was in the movie, is that one where Gandalf and Aragorn talk about everything. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that Saruman kind of has... They talk about how Saruman has his own goals, that he wants the ring.
Yeah.
And that Sauron, if Saruman got the ring, which he sent his Uruk-hai out to do, that basically then Sauron would have to go to war with Saruman and his Uruk-hai, and Aragorn says, if Minas Tirith wasn't in between Mordor and Isengard, we could just let them fight and watch. And I was like, yeah, that would be nice. But
yeah,
Gandalf squashes that pretty quickly of being like, well, whoever won would be like way more powerful afterwards because they'd have the armies of both probably or something, and then we'd truly be screwed. So it wouldn't really work out. But I thought that was interesting. That Saruman's kind of, he's working with Sauron, but is kind of doing his own thing, which we get a little bit of in the book or in the movie, but not as clear as it is in the movie.
Yeah. Treebeard is the oldest living thing in existence
on Middle Earth, as far as they can tell, which is not mentioned in the book or the movie. That I thought was, again, his stuff is very reminiscent, and we'll talk about this a little bit at some point, of Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
And kind of that the mythology of Middle Earth and this weird ancient being that has like existed forever that we know a little bit about, but not a lot about, and like is super powerful, is kind of a very similar thing going on.
There's a great line too about that. He says, "We are made of the bones of the earth."
Yeah.
Which is just like it's
a cool line.
Yeah.
It's a very cool line. The Ents go to war. And they have so in the book, they just go to war. They decide to. We'll talk about that. I'm not sure which way I could go on this one, but in the book, they vote at the Entmoot to go to war. In the movie, they vote not to. And then they get convinced to. But in the book, they choose, and then as they're marching to war, they have a war song. And that I don't recall, but it is pretty cool. And there's one moment in particular in it that I am amazed isn't... that is not sampled for in like songs and stuff. There's part of the Entish war cry. It's like the first line of it is Treebeard, and if it was in the movie, it would definitely be sampled because it's Treebeard says, "Whom, here we come with a boom." It's like sounds like lyrics straight out of like a hip hop song or something. I was just like, what? That's gotta have been sampled in something or quoted, I guess, because there's no audio of it. But yeah, their war song's pretty cool. So this is a thing that this movie actually does. These movies do pretty well, and so do the books. And I'm not an expert on medieval era-ish. Again, this isn't medieval, but it's adjacent. It's vaguely inspired by medieval sort of history and warfare. In the book, there's a mention that when they get to Edoras and they're talking after they exercise Theoden and everything, and they're going to go to war, they all gear up and get supplies. They go to the war room and they get weapons and stuff at Edoras to go to war. And it's mentioned that Legolas and Aragorn both take shields, which this is a thing that a lot of times in fantasy movies and TV shows and fiction in general, the people don't actually use the weapons that they would and the equipment that they would use in the historical context. Like, and this movie does an okay job at times. Like, everybody would use a shield a lot of time. Not everybody, but most of the time you would be using a shield. Everybody has a spear. So swords weren't main weapons in medieval times. Swords were a side weapon that you wore them on your hip when you were in town, or if your other main weapon got destroyed or you used it, sword. You had your sword as a backup. It wasn't the thing you ran into war with. Right. It was the thing you had on your hip.
Think like if you've ever seen jousting. Yeah. Like they have the lance, and then if the lance gets destroyed or gets knocked out of their hands,
and they get unseated or whatever,
then they have their sword.
Yeah. And that's like, so typically, from my understanding, and from I've watched YouTube videos about this. When armies would go to war, it would be shields and spears, always shields and spears. And now this movie actually does a fair amount of that. Where when we see the Uruk-hai army at the end, they all have spears and shields. A little less because they're sieging, and maybe doesn't make quite as much sense, but it does. They all have spears and shields. And Roham, all the Rohirrim, because they're horse riders or whatever, they all have shields and spears. Yeah. And also swords that they carry. And they all wear helmets, which is really good because it's a lot of things. The other thing that fantasy doesn't do is everybody would be wearing helmets, at least of some sort. And now Gimli wears the helmet, but Aragorn and Legolas would both also be wearing helmets. Again, you do
cover that flowing hair, man.
I know, and that's why they don't do it. But But I liked in the book that they at least mentioned a lot that the people all use spears and have shields because that's actually at least somewhat how it would work, as opposed to just everybody running around with a bastard sword, like fighting.
I mean, right, and if you think about it, a sword, you're forced to get up close and personal with your enemy if you're fighting with a sword, and that would be a last resort. Yeah, absolutely. It's the thing you use after you get through the other stuff if you have to. It's not the best. Certain situations, I know there might be some historical, there's certain situations where, well, you would use it, blah, 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 I get that. But I think, from my understanding, usually swords or spears, shields, and helmets. And they do half of that in these books and movies, so. We talked about it earlier, but Éowyn is left in charge at Edoras. I'm not sure that this makes sense in the movie. I like it in the book. It's like a little thing that, like, she gets put in charge of Edoras because they respect her and blah, 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 which is cool. Whereas in the movie, she just he's like, go mind the women and children in the cave. That's an important job. I mean, it is, I guess, but like it feels a little like shunning her off. And now she wants to go to war in the book, and he's like, here, stay. I think she does. I can't remember. Yeah, she does.
But he's like, hey, stay in charge of this entire city, which feels less like go mind the women and children. It's still kind of that, but it feels a little less like it because she's like left as like steward of the throne, basically. And it's made a point that she's like the first woman ever to like, I think I could maybe adding that in my head, but I thought there was mention that like this is the first time a woman's been left in charge of Edoras or something like that. And so I like that again, it doesn't really make sense in the movie because they all leave Edoras, so they can't do that. I also think that her love story with Aragorn makes more sense in the book because it's just like an unrequited glancing thing from a distance. Yeah. Whereas in the movie, it happens very quickly. It seems like they've known each other for a few days, and then the moment that really I like all their scenes together and their like interaction and how she like falls in love with him when he like talks to a horse. Oh, that's great, and I get it. But then at the end when she's talking to him, and she's like, "Hey," he's like, "Hey, you got to go do this thing," and she's like, "Well, I want to be beside you or something." And she says a line in the movie about like, well, your friends stay beside you not because you ask, but or he says like, I couldn't ask you to fight beside me or something. And she goes, well, your friends stay beside you not because you ask, but because they love you. Yeah. Implying that she loves him. And I'm like, you guys have known each other for like a few days. We've had like 2 scenes together. You're a new kid. It just feels like.
It's a real hard crush.
I get it.
Feels like love.
I get it, I guess. It just feels a little like. It feels like the movie wants us to have more oomph in their relationship than I feel we've gotten at this point. Like, I feel like the movie wants us to be like, yeah, man, she loves you. Let her fight for you. And I'm like, does she? She likes him. She thinks he's hot. Like, I don't know if she loves him. I don't feel like they've had enough together for her. I don't know. I get it. It in the tropes of like the fantasy for love at first sight. You know, I get it. And like they're also on death's door and all of those things. Like I get it. It just feels a little rushed to me in the movie, whereas the book just doesn't really have it. So it can't feel rushed. Anyways.
So the whole sequence where Aragorn falls off the cliff and everybody thinks that he's dead. That's not in the book. It feels a little bit unnecessary in the movie. Yeah. Like we know he's alive. We know he's coming back. Yeah. At least eventually. The third movie is called Return of the King, so at some point he's coming back. We know he's not dead. But I like your theory.
So my theory, and this is a better in the movie, I guess we can talk about it now because it goes off of this. 100% the reason that so I like the addition of the warg scene, and we'll talk about that. But he goes over the cliff, and again, we all know he's alive. We know he's coming back. It's the third one's Return to the King. He's the king. We've talked about it. We know he's coming back. I guess you can argue that, like, oh, is he going to get there in time for Helm's Deep, or what's going to happen? Like, I get it. It just doesn't do a lot for me in terms of like adding any sort of interesting tension. But 100% it's worth it. 100% this whole scene is worth it of him going over the cliff just for the single moment at the end of the movie, in the beginning of the third act or whatever, when he arrives at Helm's Deep, gets off his horse injured, and then walks into the main hall and throws those 2 doors open with his head down and is silhouetted by the sun. And it's like this badass, like the king has returned, the prequel moment, like the king has returned to Helm's Deep instead of to Minas Tirith, and it's a badass shot, and I totally am like, you know what, fine, I'll give you all of that that I don't think's necessary, just so I can have this shot of Aragorn triumphantly returning through the doors like a badass. You win, Peter Jackson. Legolas wishes for elven archers. We talked about this, but none show up.
Yeah.
And I do enjoy Haldir being there in the movie. Doesn't we talked about all this. Doesn't really make a lot of sense timeline-wise. I don't know if they could get there. Maybe they could. I don't know. It just feels a little weird from how long everything happens. But I get it. I get it. I just don't know if it makes a lot of sense for them to show up.
So there are men who take up with Saruman and fight for him alongside orcs at Helm's Deep. And they do this because they felt grieved by Rohan.
Yeah.
Now, here is a question that I had. They call them the Wild Men in the book. Were the Wild Men colonized by Rohan and denied their ancestral lands? Is that what happened?
I don't think that's the implication. It's possible. But it does. I think the book mentions that whatever happened a long time ago between the main Rohan people and these men of the hills or whatever they are.
Yeah.
And that may be the case. They may have been like colonized and sort of rejected them. I don't know. In which case, yeah, you get it. And now I will say, so this actually, I forgot this happens and I think it's only in the extended version. But this does happen in the book or in the movie that we see Saruman rousing these men, these wild men, the men from the hills or whatever. But the thing I like about in the book that it doesn't happen in the movie is that they actually show up and fight at Helm's Deep.
Right.
Which I just think is interesting to have multiple different forces there. And now I think probably a big reason they don't do that in the movie is for CG purposes. It's a lot easier to do a lot of the same similar looking orc. You know what I mean? Like make a big 10,000 person army of the similar looking orc than it is to do a 10,000 person army of orcs with like a couple groups of like men that look a little so like that's probably part of it. But in the book, the group that brings the battering ram up the ramp to break down the doors is the men, the wild men of the hills or whatever. And then I also think it's interesting at the end how they kind of they come to and they capture them and they put them to work, and there's like an implied potential future reckoning between them or something. I don't know. I just think it's kind of an interesting dynamic that the movie does, to be fair, include a little bit, but we all don't see them at Helm's Deep, I guess is the difference there. So in the books, Éomer is not gone. Éomer is there and fights at Helm's Deep. He is not. He is locked away at the beginning of the books, or at one point in the books, he gets locked away for being insubordinate or whatever and threatening Grima or something. But he doesn't get banished and he doesn't ride away with his men or whatever. He's just like locked away in the dungeon of Edoras, and then comes back after Grima is kicked out and is with us the rest of the movie. So in the Battle of Helm's Deep, Aragorn and Éomer do the thing where they sneak out the door and then go around, and that happens in the book. They go around and they like ambush the people on the ramp trying to knock down the door, but it's Aragorn and Éomer. And then we find out at the end of that scene that Gimli snuck out with them. They didn't know he was there. And at one point after they kill a bunch of guys, and then Éomer almost gets killed, but Gimli jumps out and saves him. And there's this great discussion where they're like, oh, we didn't even know you were here, Gimli. And he says, well, I came with you guys. I snuck out. I saw you guys coming out here, and I wanted to come fight with you. But then when I got here, I saw how big the Uruk-hai were, and I decided to sit back in the shadows and watch your guys' sword play because this looked like a you thing. That's what he says. And it's such a great little moment. I was like, oh, okay. That's kind of fun. And it feels kind of like a Gimli thing to some extent, although he's also like super gung-ho in the movies and like is unfazed or he's never scared of anything, but I still thought it was funny. I prefer the movie version, and we'll talk about why when we get to better in the movie, but I like that joke of him being like, I thought you guys had it. You guys could handle it. All right.
Aragorn's got a great line that didn't make it into the movie.
It kind of does, but not really. Yeah.
Dawn is ever the hope of men.
Yeah. In the overnight when Helm's Deep is the big battle, and they're losing hope, somebody said, Aragorn says like Dawn is coming, and they're like, well, what hope does Dawn bring? And Aragorn responds with, Dawn is ever the hope of men. And we know that it is in this case. Yeah. They don't know in the book because that's different, and we'll talk about that. They don't know that Gandalf's coming at dawn. In the movie, they do, potentially, or at least are hoping he is. But in the book, they don't know that when or if Gandalf is actually gonna return. But I think it's a really good line. There's a line in the movie where Aragorn says something about hope. I wanted to write it down. He has a line similar about like, there is always hope, he says to like the kid or something at one point. Yeah. But I think Dawn is ever the hope of men is the gravitas of that line in that moment is great. This is a little moment that is super weird and super not in the movie. Aragorn has a parlay with the Uruk-hai during the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Yeah.
It's so weird. And I was like, wait a second, what? He puts his hand out, which is apparently the signal in this universe that he like palm down out over the walls of the keep, and it calls for a parlay, and then him and the Uruk-hai start arguing back and forth. It is the weirdest thing. I was like, wait a second, what is going on here? You can have a parlay in the middle of this battle? And I just thought it was super, super weird. As he looked forth, he saw the eastern sky grow pale. Then he raised his empty hand, palm outward, in token of parley. The orcs yelled and jeered. Come down, they cried. If you wish to speak to us, come down, bring out your king. We are the fighting Uruk-hai. We will fetch him from his hole if he does not come. Bring out your skulking king. The king stays or comes at his own will, said Aragorn. Then what are you doing here, they answered. Why do you look out? Do you wish to see the greatness of our army? We are the fighting Uruk-hai. I looked out to see the dawn, said Aragorn. What of the dawn, they jeered. We are the Uruk-hai. We do not stop the fight for night or day, for fair weather or for storm. We come to kill by sun or moon. What of the dawn? None knows what the new day shall bring, said Aragorn. Get you gone ere it turn to your evil. Get down or we will shoot you from the wall, they cried. This is no parley. You have nothing to say. And then he basically threatens him again to leave. Like, leave or you guys, it's going to be bad. But it's just like... I just would like that in the movie. It's just like, wait a second, guys. Let's talk about this.
Gimli spends some time in the caves at Helm's Deep while they're there.
He retreats to the caves in the battle, which doesn't happen in the movie.
And he is enamored of them. Yeah. He says they're the world's most beautiful caves.
Basically, he's like, you could charge money to dwarves to come and see them caves, and they would pay a pretty penny to come look at them caves. And I was like, oh, all right. And we see a little bit of them in the movie, and they look nice. They look interesting.
I mean, they look like caves.
They look like set caves. Yeah. Like, they look, But he's like, man, those are some nice caves. Got some pretty caves around these parts.
Sweet-ass caves. So we're going to bounce back to Treebeard for a second.
Oh, yeah, because we do go back and forth a little bit.
In the book, we actually see Wormtongue arrive at Isengard, which I don't think we do in the movie. I think he's just already there when Treebeard shows up. Well, it should be.
I don't remember this at all.
But we see him show up, and Isengard has already been taken by the Ents.
Oh, this may be where I stopped reading. I may have not.
Oh, did you not read this part?
This may be in Flotsam and Jetsam or something.
Anyway, we see him. He shows up. He's riding a horse. And Treebeard is talking to him, and he just picks him right up off of his horse because he's like, "Oh, you can go see Saruman," and Wormtongue is like, "Well, I can't swim, so I can't get there." He's like, "All right," like picks him.
Yeah, I think I stopped right before that is what happened because I was like, I don't remember that at all. But yeah, that's right around the chapters where the movie ends. So then we cut back to, now we're going back to the beginning again. Get ready. Here we go. Frodo and Sam. We don't have as many notes about them.
Yeah.
I don't think. So we cut back to the beginning with Sam and Frodo. And this is where the book 4 starts. Mm-hmm. And they're stuck in Emyn Muil, just like they are in the movie. I do like this moment that they're trying to climb down a cliff in the book. And Frodo's like, well, I'm going to go. And Sam's like terrified, but he's like, nope, you're not. Because if you fall you're more important. And he's like, I'm going first. And he starts climbing down and immediately almost falls. He's like, never mind. And they're like, get up back up here. But I just like that little moment of Sam's sort of bravery, especially bravery for when he's worried about Frodo. His bravery is heightened tenfold or whatever. Yeah. And we get a lot of that in the movies, but I thought that was a nice little moment.
Something else that didn't make it into the movies. The movie just starts out with them climbing down a rope. But in the book, Sam actually forgets that he has rope because they make a couple goes of it without
trying to climb down a cliff.
Frodo almost dies because of this.
Literally almost falls off the cliff, like lightning strikes, and they think Sam thinks he fell, and then but turns out he just like fell a little bit, and then a minute later, Sam's like, wait, I got a rope in my backpack.
Oh, I love it because Sam goes, Sam, you old ass. Pulls out his rope.
He's like, I had this rope from the elves. Dang. I don't know what this next note is.
Okay, so later on, I can't remember now what he's talking about. Let me look and see what
this note for the listener just says noodles ! And I don't know what that means. It's on page 275.
Yeah, in my edition, okay. All right, so this is, they just climbed down using the rope, and they have not realized yet that, like, Sam realizes that now the rope is stuck up there, and he hasn't tried to pull on it yet. And I'll read this little section. But Sam did not answer. He was staring back up at the cliff. Ninny hammers, he said. Noodles, my beautiful rope. There it is, tied to a stump, and where at the bottom.
Yeah, those are his curses.
Yeah,
that's what
Ninny hammers and noodles.
He says something like that in the movie, doesn't he? He says shucks. I don't remember what he says, but he
says something, but he does not say noodles.
He does not say noodles. No, he might say ninny hammers though. I can't remember, but that's what noodles is. That's one of Sam's wholesome curses that he throws out when he figures out the rope is stuck. So this is a little moment that you can't really get in the movie because it's the voice of the narrator. You know, it's the what's the word I'm looking for? Description or whatever of what's going on. But so we find out after they capture Gollum that when he's tied up, he's like, the rope burns. Says the rope burns him, particularly because it's elvish rope, we think. But the book mentions that Sam actually tied it looser than he needed to or should have, because his heart was too kind. So despite all of the vitriol that Sam flings at Gollum, when he goes to tie him up, he still can't bring himself to actually like be cruel, like unnecessarily cruel to Gollum, and ends up actually tying the ropes a little bit looser than he should, which is again a little details about Sam's character that the book kind of sprinkles through. And I think the movie does a good job overall of capturing that.
Yeah. I want to talk about the discussion of their return journey a little bit.
And I think this might be in Return of the King, because I actually don't think it happened in this one now. Or did it, and I just missed it?
I think it did.
Did it? Okay, yeah. I might have just missed it. I might have been taking a note. But I do remember this in the movie. Basically, Sam's like talking about how much food they're going to have for the return journey. And Frodo just comes out and says, I don't know if there will be a return journey, Sam, or something something along those lines. And that conversation is in the book, but they don't just come right out and be like, I'm not sure if we will have a return journey.
Yeah, they kind of dance around it.
And it feels more real. And like they're not, neither of them are quite willing to admit that they both know that probably they won't have a return journey. And like in the movie plays it as Sam is still that way, but Frodo is like accepted his fate. But in the book it's not. And then that's kind of overall. Frodo isn't quite as dour and as resigned to his fate as movie Frodo. And he's not been affected nearly as much by the ring, at least at this point in the books.
Movie Frodo is pretty grim.
Yeah. And the ring we see the ring affecting him a lot more in the movies than it seems it does in the book, and we get a little bit of it, but it's not to the same extent that it is in the movie. Yeah. Which I don't dislike. I think that's a kind of an interesting way to go about it that they do in the movie, where it really ramps up to the end of this movie where it's like he almost goes and gives himself to the Nazgul because the ring has taken over him so much. That's not remotely how his character plays out in the book, which I have seen people talk about how they don't like that, how they prefer the resiliency of Frodo in the books. But I can kind of argue both ways on that one. This is not in the movie at all, and I guess it just, for whatever reason, they just had to cut it out. But after they get through the Dead Marshes, they get to this place right before the mountains that is like this sick, completely ruined, like ashen land, and it's, to me, when I read the description of it in the book, it almost felt like the surface of like the moon, but not like the surface of the moon mixed with like tar and like oil. There's like, they talk about looking down into pits and there's like this like oily multicolored slime in the bottom, and it's like all gray and gross. And it's like, I think we may see a little bit of that to some extent once we get to Return of the King, once they actually get into Mordor. But I just liked the idea of seeing this, once you get right on the doorstep of Mordor, this completely like ruined, just cursed land that is like, because the marshes are kind of like that, but not quite. There's still, plants and that sort of thing. And this is just like a desert of just filth and nothing like it.
Yeah.
And it I don't feel like the movie captured that.
Yeah.
I love this.
Smeagol, in the book, he talks about using the ring, which he does mention.
Yeah,
in the movie, he mentions that like,
but he doesn't have
he
the
could
line.
take it.
Yeah.
But in the book, he specifically muses about becoming Lord Smeagol.
Yeah.
Smeagol the Great.
Yeah, which I just love. Perhaps we grows very strong, stronger than wraiths. Lord Smeagol, Gollum the Great, the Gollum, eat fish every day, 3 times a day, fresh from the sea. Most precious Gollum, must have it, we wants it, we wants it, we wants it. Yeah, but I just love the idea of Lord Smeagol, Gollum the Great. Yeah. Oh, there's a little line in the book that is not in the movie where Frodo is talking to Gollum and he says, if I put on the ring and commanded you to do something, you would do it. Basically reminding him of the power that this ring holds over him. And he says, even if I told you to leap from a precipice or cast yourself into the fire. And I was like, that's a little bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of foreshadowing that the movie does not give us of poor Gollum's fate. So I thought that was interesting.
So we
talked about the cliff moment. We can just move on from that. There's a little moment that I really like in the book where after they catch the rabbits, or Gollum catches the rabbits, Sam's going to cook them, and he asks Gollum to go get water to cook the rabbits, to stew the rabbits in. And he has 2 pans that he gives to Gollum. And in the book, there's a description of Gollum returning from the stream, balancing the pans with the water in them. And I just really need to see the shot of Gollum walking up, like, carefully looking at both pans. He has one in each hand, like, whoa, making sure they don't spill water. Like, I think it would just be like adorable, but also like really funny. Him trying to make sure he doesn't spill the water in the pans as he kind of like hop, because he always walks on 4 hands and now he's got to walk on 2 and like, or 2 legs. And I just thought it would be great. And I mentioned it earlier, but a lot of the people actually carry spears, which the movie actually does do a better job than I remembered.
So we are at now
Faramir,
where Frodo and Sam bump into Faramir, which is pretty different in the book.
Oh, so much, which we're going to talk about at length now.
One difference is that Frodo just like outright explains to Faramir who they are.
Yeah.
And like not every detail, but like tells them who they are and kind of what they're doing. And it's kind of a refreshing scene of like 2 characters just being frank and like talking directly to each other.
Yeah, he meets them and he says, but as for us, we are hobbits of the Shire, far to the north and west, beyond many rivers. Frodo, son of Drogo, is my name, and with me is Samwise, son of Hamfast, a worthy hobbit in my service. We have come by long ways out of Rivendell, or in Ladris, as some call it. Here Faramir started and grew intent. 7 companions we had. 1 we lost at Moria. The others we left at Parth Galen above Rauros. 2 of my kin, a dwarf there was also, and an elf, and 2 men. They were Aragorn and Boromir, who said that he came out of Minas Tirith, the city in the south. Boromir, all of the men exclaimed. And it's just like, just lays it out, and it's like, these are the people I was with, this is where I came from, this is my name. And he's like, and it's like, because so many times, and the movie does it a little bit, but it's like that, like, you guys could be allies.
Yeah.
If you would just talk.
Yeah.
And now it's weird because in the book that would be the case. In the book, he does just come right out and say it, and it ends up working out because as we're about to talk about, Faramir is a great person.
Yes.
Unlike in the movie. Well, ultimately he is, but initially not so much. So this is a little backstory on Boromir that we get in the book that I thought was interesting, where he's talking about Boromir, Faramir is, and he mentions that Boromir was always upset that because Boromir thirsted for power so much that Boromir was a noble man, but he also had his flaws, and one of them was his thirst for glory and power for Rohan and for his family and house and all that sort of thing. And Faramir mentions how he was always really upset that his father Denethor was the steward of Gondor, not the actual king, because that meant that he could not be king himself one day. And he was also really upset because how long do we have to be a steward of this stupid city before we get to be a king, when no king is coming back? Kings are gone. We haven't had a king in, however long. And Faramir explains or somebody does or Dennis, I don't remember who it is. In some lesser kingdoms, 20 years, maybe the stewards become the king or whatever. But in Minas Tirith, the kingdom of all kingdoms, in Gondor, this is the true realm of men or whatever. The king could not return for 1,000 years, and they still the stewards would not take the throne or whatever. Implying the sort of the gravity of, or at least their perceived importance of Gondor and that sort of thing. And we talked about Faramir not knowing that Isildur's bane is a ring. This is where let's talk about Faramir.
Yeah, let's talk about Faramir. Faramir, the pure-hearted.
This is a really interesting change, and one that I really prefer the book version. Now, we'll talk about why I think I understand why they changed him in the movie and why they do what they do with the movie. But in the book, Faramir is just the nicest, most noble.
Yeah.
He's like Aragorn on crack. He's literally just the best person.
A bad thought has never entered his mind.
Yeah. He literally, all he thinks about is because in the movie, they play him, as you described, with sort of a second son syndrome of because Denethor prefers Boromir, and he'll never live up to being as awesome as Boromir is, and he's always resentful of it. And Boromir even treats him nice. Boromir's not a shit to him. He's talks, in the movie. But that is not the case. Faramir knows who he is in the book. He's fine with who he is.
Yeah.
He's not there for glory. He's literally just interested in protecting the kingdom, protecting Gondor, because he loves the city. Here's a little bit of him talking to Frodo. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I only love that which they defend, the city of the men of Númenor. And I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man old and wise.
So pure.
He's so pure. He's so pure. He's look, man, he's like a hippie who's forced into combat and is pretty good at it and has to do literally he's look, I don't want us remembered for our wars and for our fierceness. I want to be remembered because of how great and pure and smart and the cultural implications of our city. That's what he cares about. That's what he's defending, and he defends it because he has to. Because if he doesn't, no one will. That's his lot. But he's not worried about power. He doesn't have an inferiority complex with Boromir he does in the books. He even says it's unfortunate Boromir went to the council because he knew. He says it's unfortunate Boromir went because he was older and more rash. He goes, if I had gone, I wouldn't have tried to take the ring from you, and Boromir wouldn't be dead, and maybe the fellowship wouldn't have split up. I get why Boromir went, because he's older, he's braver, he's tougher. It's amazing. I don't know. He's so different, and it's just I get why the movie does it. The movie does it because they want us to be unsure as an audience. They want us to look at him and go, well, is he going to be like Boromir? Is he going to try to take the ring?
We're creating tension.
Yeah. It adds a lot of tension. And also, I will say that I don't know what you do with the Frodo and Sam story at the end of this book if they don't go to Osgiliath and there isn't that tension, because you're not doing Shelob's Lair at the end of this movie.
Right.
So you need some sort of rise in tension and a release for their storyline.
Yeah.
Whereas if they followed the book while Helm's Deep and all this is happening and we're cutting back to Frodo and Sam, it's literally them having a happy feast with Faramir and like hanging out, and then him being like, look, I don't like that you guys are following Gollum, but okay, if you want to, I'll let you go and I'll give you supplies and like you go with the good grace of men. Like he ends kind of similar, except for the abusing Gollum for no reason part in the movie. Like he ends similarly in the movie where he's like, go with the good grace of men and go. But that's just him from the beginning in the book. He's just like, oh, I know. Yeah, that's your mission. All right, cool. I'll help you in the way I can. But, you know, I'm not going to take the ring from you. He says numerous times, like they keep like worried that he's going to take the ring. And he like laughs about it and is like, guys, I'm not taking the ring. I don't want the ring. Just go do your thing. Like, it's fine. And again, you can't have that moment juxtaposed to the Helm's Deep. It just doesn't really work. You need kind of also tension. I get it, but it feels...
He's almost, in the books, he's almost Tom Bombadil-ish.
Yeah, a little bit,
Yeah, he's just so, like, pure and, like, doesn't even want that power.
He doesn't at all. And I think that, you know, we talked about Aragorn, because in the books, that's kind of Aragorn, where he has no strife about returning to the throne. He's yes, I've been raised for the throne. I'm gonna go back and get the throne, and I'm gonna do it. That's Aragorn in the books. In the movie, he's torn. He doesn't know. He doesn't want to accept the power. He doesn't think he can handle the throne. All that sort of things. And I find that more interesting. Sort of the troubled, unsure Aragorn is a more interesting protagonist in the movie. But with Faramir, I actually think I prefer the sort of the polar opposite reflection of Boromir in him is a more interesting character to me, to just, especially because I think if the movie had given us that tension at first a little bit and then completely undercut it with just Faramir like the book does, is what the book does, is we get that tension at first when he runs into Faramir. They're not sure. He sits down and he interrogates Frodo and we're not sure which way it's going to go. But very quickly it becomes clear that no, Faramir is just a great guy. He's just going to help them and let them go and do their thing. And he's just going to be cool about it and like give them food and stuff. Anyways, that's enough about Faramir. But I feel like that's a thing that people would want to hear our thoughts on, because if you are a book lover and a book reader, that is a pretty stark change to not a main character, but a major character.
Yes.
It's the biggest, I think I would argue the biggest change in terms of character in all of them, other than maybe Aragorn, with, again, how his kind of storyline is going, or where his storyline is going. But I think it's the biggest departure from the books in terms of character. And so I think it needed to be addressed for people who like Book Faramir, because I'm a Book Faramir stan. I like Book Faramir. And I don't, and the thing that bothers me, even in the movie, even when he decides to let them go, is that when he's like grabbing Gollum by the neck and throwing him against the wall, and it's like, how dare you, where are you taking them? And he's not, Book Faramir is not cruel for no reason. And again, you can argue that's not for no reason. He's worried that he's leading them to, that Gollum's leading Sam and Frodo to their death or whatever. And he does ask them about that in the book, but he doesn't grab him by the throat and slam him against the wall, unless I'm misremembering. He just interrogate him.
Yeah.
And so even in the movie, once it is determined that he is a good guy and is going to let them go, he's still kind of an ass for that moment. Now, from what I remember, I think they did a little course correction, and Return of the King movie Faramir is much more like, he's still got the second son thing, and he goes and dies for almost dies for no reason. But anyways, all right, enough about Faramir. Let's move on. I just had to talk about Faramir. The window of the sunset, that's the waterfall in front of the cave.
Yes.
When they go to Faramir's hideout. In the book, the description of it is as of this magical, beautiful sight, and we just kind of see it in the background in the movie of the light in the book. It's like the light refracting through the water as it's falling, and the sunset and the light that it creates is this huge, beautiful, amazing thing. And again, it's just kind of in the background. And I wish there would have been a little more of them marveling at it. It doesn't matter, but whatever.
I don't know what this means.
You don't know what Faramir got a fetish for them Rohan folk means?
I mean, I know what it means, but like I didn't remember where you pulled that from.
I pulled this line from a very specific part because Faramir does have a fetish for them Rohan folk.
I mean, he ends up in a good place then.
Yes, he does. Of our lore and manners, this is Faramir talking about the people of Rohan. Of our lore and manners, they have learned what they would, and their lords speak our speech at need. Yet for the most part, they hold by the ways of their own fathers and to their own memories, and they speak among themselves their own North tongue. And we love them, tall men and fair women, valiant both alike, golden-haired, bright-eyed, and strong. They remind us of the youth of men as they were in the elder days. Tall men and fair women, valiant both alike, golden-haired, bright-eyed, and strong. I was like, all right, Faramir. We hear you, bud. You like them? You like them Rohan folk. Got a good surprise for you, at least in the movie. I don't know if this happens in the book, but yeah. We talked about...
Oh, yeah. Sam gets himself a little bit lit. Spills his secrets about the ring.
That's how Faramir finds out about it.
Yeah, but he just laughs about it. He just
laughs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just know, and that's the other thing I do like is that with all the tension in this and who they can trust and all this, I do like that moment of levity with Faramir of just like, they just hang out and they're like, yeah, man.
Yeah.
I'm a good guy. I'm just a good guy. But they do in the book talk about, and they talk about this in the movie, that Gollum's taking him to Cirith Ungol and he's like, hey, man, there's some unnamed terrible thing there.
Yeah.
Don't go there. But they're like, well, where should we go? And he's like, I don't have a better idea, so I guess go to Cirith Ungol, but like, be careful. Which the movie does do that. I had this here before we watched it because I wasn't sure if that was in the movie or not, but it is mostly. It's a little longer in the book, but Faramir gives them dope walking sticks.
Yeah, he gives them fancy
walking
sticks.
Do they have those at the end of the movie? Well, he doesn't give them to them if they do.
They do have walking sticks at one point.
Yeah, but anyways, he gives them cool, like carved with like shod with metal walking sticks and for the mountains or that sort of thing.
Some fancy shit.
And then the final little thing. Do you remember this? There's when they get to the crossroads, which maybe this happens in Return of the King because they didn't quite get to the crossroads yet. But when they get to the crossroads, they see a statue of a king that has crumbled. But on the ground, the head of the statue of the king has a crown on it because the flowers have grown around it and formed a circlet crown.
A flower crown.
Yeah. And I was like, this is a nice little tease setup for the Return of the King.
Yeah.
There you go. Symbolism. Nice. And then again, that may be in the beginning of the next movie, but I don't think it is. That's it. For better in the movie.
No, that's it.
Sorry, better in the book. Now we're moving on to better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
Jumping back again to the end of Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn is talking to somebody at the, I think Legolas and Gimli at the edge of the river, maybe, in the book. And he says, I would have guided Frodo to Mordor and gone with him to the end. He says that again to, I think it's like Legolas and Gimli, maybe Boromir, somebody. But I prefer the movie's change of this. In the movie, and we talked about it, he actually goes and talks to Frodo before Frodo leaves. Yeah. And he says, I would have gone with you to the end, into the very fire of Mount Doom or something like that. Yeah. Into the very fire of Mordor. And that's that line, but they give it him giving it to Frodo, which I like, as opposed to just saying that he would do that to other people. He actually tells Frodo, and Frodo's like, I know. Now run. Yeah.
So the movie has an epic opening action hook. Yeah. With Gandalf fighting the Balrog. Yeah. That cuts before we find out totally what happened. Yeah. But it's clever, it's interesting.
It's a good hook,
yeah. The shot of them falling down into the cavern is so cool.
The big wide shot where it pulls out to a huge wide shot of this cavern, and then it's dark, and then the fire of the Balrog comes in. I just want that post. Like, it's so freaking cool. It's one of the coolest shots in the whole movie. But it's super epic. And then it cuts, and it was Frodo dreaming about this. And we don't know how it ends. Because I was like, are they going to spoil that Gandalf came back at the beginning? I don't remember this at all. But no, they they kind of tease it, but
yeah,
which I thought was cool. So the thing with songs, we've talked about songs numerous times, but this is one for sure. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli set out on their search for Merry and Pippin. What do? We're on a real crunch for time, Katie. We gotta go find them. The Uruk have a head start. We gotta run. Let's travel light. Don't bring any supplies because we're just gonna be sprinting for days. But first, I'm gonna sing a song. Literally, Aragorn stops to sing a song.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have time for this, Aragorn. You don't have time.
You really don't have time for it.
On a similar note, then, while they're chasing them, they waste so much time in the book discussing what they should do.
Yeah.
Like, they're always stopping and like, well, should we rest? Should we keep chasing them? Should we give it up? What should we do? And like, nobody wants to make a decision, so they just like stand around hemming and hawing.
Then Aragorn's like, let's keep running. And they're like, all right.
So the movie cuts all that shit.
Yeah, and montages it.
Yeah.
They do mention, like, a couple times how long it's been, so we know it's been a couple days, but yeah, they just kind of, like, montage. Run. Mm-hmm. Look for him. Oh, cool. Oh, yeah, and they do see the old man at the fire that one time. That's right.
Yeah.
They see an old man in a white robe at one point, and they're not sure what it is. I think Gimli sees him mainly.
Yeah.
And nothing happens with that, but they find out later that was in fact Saruman.
Yeah.
It's so weird because...
But nothing happens with it. Never goes anywhere. Never means anything.
No. Just that Saruman was in the area.
Yeah.
Because... They don't. It's so weird because you would think it's like a tease for Gandalf.
You would think that.
But then they go and they talk to Gandalf, and Gandalf's like, "No, I wasn't here yet. That must have been Saruman." And they're like, "Oh, okay."
And then that's that.
It's just like, what is that? Okay, great, cool. Okay, cool.
A couple lines.
Yeah.
A red sun rises. Blood has been spilled this night.
That's the movie line, which is iconic. To me, like, every line in all of these movies is iconic. It's like I could quote half of them. I'm just in love with all of the dialogue and lines in this movie. But I love that line, and it's a similar line in the book. But he says, like, a red dawn, strange things await us. Yeah. Is what Legolas says, which is like less cool, like less dramatic.
Way less cool. Also, not in the book. Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?
They do spend a lot of time in the book asking Legolas to look for things.
Yeah.
That does come up, but that specific line.
Right. And he does not have the specific response of they're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
Yeah. Which, if that had not been... Where would we be?
The world would be a completely different place.
Yeah. Be at least one less meme in the world if he had not said they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, and that is just in the movie. I like seeing Saruman ordering the burning of Fangorn. I like all of the added stuff we get with Saruman and like the sort of side plots and stuff. Mm-hmm. And seeing him go and talk to the orcs and be like, yes, burn Fangorn, blah, blah, blah. I think it's interesting, and because in the movie we stay in the perspective of our protagonists the whole time, we don't ever leave their world of frame of reference, really. So I like that the movie occasionally does that and gets us a little more establishment of our villains and what they're doing and that sort of thing.
And similar, and we mentioned it earlier, but actually seeing the Wild Northmen raiding the countryside on Saruman's orders, and then seeing the effect that has. Yeah,
you don't ever get they talk about in the book once that they're like burning things, and but like we don't get any like real up close like effects of what the orcs and the wild men pillaging the countryside is, whereas in the movie we get to see this family torn apart by the Saruman's forces coming through and burning their village down, and these kids running and worried that their mother's dying, and like all of that. It really helps drive home sort of the terror and the evilness of what's happening here. They give one of Gandalf's lines to Wormtongue. No, they give one of Gandalf's lines about Wormtongue to Éomer, where in the book Gandalf says, "How long have you been purchased by Saruman?" That sort of thing, and Éomer gets to say that to Wormtongue And then can talk about him creeping on Éowyn.
Yeah.
And again, I actually dislike this whole introduction of this plot line earlier. Mm-hmm. We don't see anything at Edoras or Rohan, or Edoras specifically, until our protagonists show up there. And so we get all of the story for that crammed into one scene.
All crunched in together.
When they show up, they have all of these conversations at once. I think it was really smart to remove that, establish who Wormtongue is, establish that he's a creep, establish that he's potentially bought by Saruman.
Yeah, so we establish all of these different characters who are at Edoras. We establish like their kind of background story and their dynamic and what's going on with them. And then all of our protagonists show up.
Yeah.
Which really kind of clarifies things.
Yeah, it's a much better way to do it, I think.
Yeah.
I do like, though, in the book, I also like in the movie that Grima banishes Éomer.
Yeah.
This does not happen in the movie. They do lock him up, or it does not happen in the book. They lock him up in the book, but they don't banish him. He banishes him, and I like in the movie that he says by decree of the king, and he holds up a written decree, but you can see the signature is like scribbled and like trails off the page, like clearly didn't know what he was signing. And I think that very quickly establishes the dynamic between Grima and Theoden, and that Grima's pulling all the strings here, and very clearly sets up what's going on, and that Grima is kind of shadow puppeting this whole situation to his benefit and what he wants. And I thought that was a really good way to show that very quickly without spending a lot of time talking. Yeah, in this moment, there's a moment... because we've talked about it, but that Aragorn already has Anduril, the sword that was broken in the book, whereas he doesn't get it until Return of the King in the movies. And he literally pulls out, when he meets Éomer and them, he pulls out his sword and goes full... he goes full Danny Breaker of Chains. He says Aragorn they're having a kind of a confrontation between, they're not sure of each other. Éomer and them are not sure of each other yet, and Aragorn threw back his cloak. The elven sheath glittered as he grasped it, and the bright blade of Anduril shone like a sudden flame as he swept it out. Elendil, he cried, I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and am called Elisar, the Elfstone, Dunedain, the heir of Isildur, Elendil, son of Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken and is forged again. Will you aid me or thwart me? Choose swiftly. And I like it. That's Danny Breaker of Chains. Yeah. Like, these are all my names. This is why I'm here. Are you going to get out of my way or are you going to help? Like, we don't, that's book Aragorn, who's very cocksure and like, knows he's all for his fate and his destiny and that sort of thing. And movie Aragorn, not so much. Yeah. Also doesn't have the sword that was broken yet. So I just thought that was really funny because it just very much reminded me of Daenerys, House Targaryen, first of her name. So I'm like, Breaker of Chains, all that stuff.
I like that the movie does not have them recap every single thing that happened to Éomer, because guess what? I know. Yeah. Because I read/watched it. Yeah. You don't need to recap.
We're good.
More on that later.
We're good. There's a line in the movie that's not in the book. There's a similar line. This line in the book is Éomer's talking to Aragorn and them, and they're like, we hope we can find our friends or something. And Éomer says, hope does not remain, or something, basically. In the movie, the line, and I quote it every time, is Éomer says, do not trust to hope. It has forsaken these lands. It's just really great. It's just truly amazing.
Speaking of another great line.
Yeah, iconic line.
Looks like meat's back on the menu.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. That is not in the book. There is a scuffle between the orcs and the Uruk-hai and all that stuff, and they do kill a few of them, but that there's no talk of eating them, and that great line is not in the book. I do like a lot. So we get in the book and the movie, Aragorn sort of sleuthing out what happened to Merry and Pippin when they get to the battle that took place. But in the movie, I really like that we intercut between Aragorn figuring something out and then cut back to the night before with Merry and Pippin doing that thing.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of visual interest created by that, like, back and forth.
Yeah, the back and forth, and you're like, oh, and then their bonds were cut, and then we cut and see them cutting their bonds. Like, it's just really interesting. I think it's a fun way to do that without having us watch it all happen once and then have Aragorn talk about it once. Just do it at the same time. I also like that in the book or in the movie, they change it to when Merry and Pippin get free, they just run into the woods because they're right next to it. The book, it's like convoluted and weird. They get free and then they crawl away. And then they sit there for a long time while the battle's happening.
Yeah.
And they like listen to the battle and then they crawl some more and then they eat some food for a while. Yeah. And I'm like, just go into the woods.
Get out of here.
What are you doing? And I guess the idea is that if they get up and run, they'll be seen or something. I don't know. Yeah. But it still just feels like the movie, them being right by the woods and then just sprinting into the woods makes perfect sense. And is like, yep, okay, cool, great.
Yeah. We mentioned this earlier, but Treebeard straight up stomping that orc.
Yeah.
The mega nasty orc.
Yeah, mega nasty orc. Also, on Treebeard, the description's pretty close in the book, but one thing that I thought I didn't understand in the book that the movie doesn't do anything with is that it's described that he has like human-like hands or something like that, and I thought it was very, very strange. It belonged to a large, man-like, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 feet high, very sturdy with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green and gray bark or whether that was its hide was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms at a short distance from the trunk were not wrinkled, but covered with a brown, smooth skin. And that seems weird to me. Yeah. I think the movie just making him look like a tree. Yeah. But like with a face and limbs and stuff makes sense. I don't want to see like weird, smooth skinned arms on Treebeard. So I don't know. I think that just makes like a design change that makes a lot of sense.
I almost wonder if what Tolkien was picturing was almost like a person wearing a tree costume.
I can kind of see what he's going.
Well, because the lore, I don't know how much truth there is to this, but like the lore about the whole like Fangorn and the Ents is that Tolkien read Macbeth. Oh. Which Macbeth has the scene where the prophecy is that the forests will move or like the trees will walk or something like that, but then it ends up being like guys disguised as trees. Oh. And the lore is that Tolkien was disappointed by that and wanted it to actually be moving trees, so he wrote that into his story.
That's very possible.
So,
and if that's the case, then I guess that makes sense. But I just thought it was weird, and I was like, it's a little odd. I like it just being like a living tree, but I can see they could do it and make it work, but I think it would be tough.
But we can do the living tree thing with CG. Yeah. We don't have to have a tall person in a tree costume.
Very true. Very true.
We cut a lot of the time.
But we actually do get a little of this that I forgot about. But we do,
We cut a lot of the time that's spent with Treebeard. There's a lot more in the book. Like they go to his house and they stay there for a couple days.
This chapter was incredibly hard for me to read in the book.
I didn't mind it as much as you seemed to.
I literally read this chapter for like 3 days. I would stop and start it and I would read a little bit and then get bored. And I really had a tough time with the Treebeard chapter. It's called Treebeard. But the movie cuts a lot of it. We get some of it, especially in the extended cut. They cut almost all of it in the regular cut, like the theatrical version. But in the extended cut, we actually go see his home and they hang out and they drink some of the stuff and they get tall. And they had a weird, they fall asleep or they go, well, there's a couple things. When they're going to his home, I thought this had to be intentionally in meta, like a joke at the expense of the books. While Treebeard's taking them to his house, he's talking to them, and they both just start falling asleep. Yeah, and I was like, okay, this feels very very purposeful and very on. Like the joke is on. Like, yep, this is how I feel reading this part of the book because holy cow, that was absolutely like it felt like they made that scene for me in that moment. But also, they have an interesting scene once they get to his house. They drink a bunch of weird tree juice, and it makes them taller. They drink.
It's the Ent wash.
Yeah. Well, they drink it in the book, but it doesn't make them taller, does it? Or is that mentioned? I guess I forgot that.
Because Gimli says, like, I would swear you're taller and your hair is curlier. And then later on, I think maybe Gandalf or somebody is like, oh, you drank
I stopped
from
reading
the
before
Entwash,
that.
didn't you?
I stopped reading before that part.
Okay.
You're right. That's what it is. But anyway, so while they're there, they have. So we talked about how they cut out all the Tom Bombadil in the Old Forest in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes.
That happens in this book.
Yeah.
They take a scene from it, or in this movie. They take a scene from Fellowship.
Yeah, the old willow tree scene where it like kind of sucks them into the roots. It's totally in this movie.
It's in this movie. And
it's in the extended cut. It's not in the theatrical cut.
Yeah.
And I think we also thought they gave some of Tom Bombadil's lines
absolutely.
to Treebeard.
Treebeard comes up and yells at the tree to let them go.
Yeah.
And it says, I'm like 99% sure, I didn't go back and look, but I would bet money that he says some of the same lines that Tom Bombadil says.
And I mean, they're not dissimilar characters.
No, we talked about this.
all.
They're very similar
So-
type. We've talked about it earlier. Yeah, they're very similar style of characters.
Yeah.
And so it kind of works.
Yeah.
And again, it's a little thing for book readers, I guess. So the "You Are Not Orcs" line is both in the book and the movie. I think I prefer the movie version where it's a nice, really good punchline that's built up pretty well, where they have the whole big thing, and then he comes and he's like, "We have a decision. You are not orcs," and they're like, "What?" that line's in the book, but the buildup isn't there, and it doesn't have the same sort of punchline moment that it does in the movie.
Yeah.
It's funny in the book still. But it just happens kind of right away. They're just like, they talk for a few minutes and they're like, "We decided you aren't orcs." And they're like, "Okay, cool." And in the movie, it's just way funnier. Well, that's good. Or whatever Pippin says. So I'm really torn on this. I want to talk about it and see what you think. I think I don't know if I prefer how it happens. I think I prefer in the movie that the Ents choose not to go to war, but are then sort of coaxed into it by Pippin and Merry. By sort of tricking them into going to Isengard. In the book, Treebeard knows about Saruman, knows he's destroying the Force. He wants to go stop him. And they vote to, and they go do it. Like, that's what happens. They talk about it for a while, but they do go and they just vote and they go to war.
Yeah. I think I prefer the way that the movie does it. And I think it makes sense because we mentioned before Treebeard is old.
Yeah.
And I think that old kind of older, like being set in your ways and like not really wanting.
I think you can read into this, and now I don't think this was definitely not the purpose of the book with this sort of storyline, but I think it may have been to some extent what the movie was going for, maybe a little bit. I don't know. I thought I had this written down somewhere, but I guess I don't. Maybe I just wanted to talk about it. You can kind of read this as the way the movie plays out the end thing as a discussion on climate change.
Yeah.
As a not a discussion, as a symbolism for climate change. We have the industry destroying nature. All of the old powers that can do something about it sit and talk forever.
They talk forever, but they don't actually want to do anything.
Want to do anything about it. And then the young people who are there insist and trick them.
Wait a second.
And the way they get them to talk them into it is by showing them the effect it directly has on them.
Yeah.
By walking them to their forest and being like, "Look, these," and because Treebeard's like, "These were my friends. I knew these trees."
Yeah. And I mean that it is unfortunate that it does tend to be a thing with the older.
Yeah, I don't want to be ageist here. There's plenty of old people who don't. I don't mean to be ageist in that sense, but like it does tend to be that currently in the political climate, is at least in America, that the older people who are in power and who have the ability to potentially do something about this will not do anything about it. And I think you can definitely read that symbolism into the scene. And I think having that play out that way it's a good change for our times. And again, that probably wasn't in 1960 or whatever. They may have just been, I think they were just beginning to realize that there was an issue. From what I remember, is that right around 60s, 70s, they were realizing like, maybe something's going on with the climate that we need to worry about. But that was like very early stages. And wouldn't have been something that he was like commenting on, I would imagine. He was mainly just talking about industry or industrialism as a whole, as opposed to like climate change. But in this regard, I think the symbolism of the way it plays out in the movie, it makes a lot of sense and works really well as a metaphor for that conflict. Whereas in the book, just having them vote to go fix it is like cool, but that's not how this works, unfortunately. At least it's not how it's worked so far. So, yeah.
I do like the war song, though, as I said.
War song's great.
War song is cool.
I prefer the movie version of how they come across Gandalf, or how our people, how Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli come across him. In the book, he just like they're up on a hill and he like slowly climbs up to them and they talk for a while before he reveals who he is. And I don't know, I pictured it while I was reading the book of them like circling around each other and like never quite seeing him. I imagined Gandalf like with his hat pulled down over his face, like, and like looking down at the ground so that they can't see his, like, why can't, like, I guess maybe it's dark, I don't know. But they have a whole conversation before
the drama.
Yeah. They have a whole ass conversation before they realize it's Gandalf and he reveals himself. But then the moment where he does reveal himself is very similar to the movie, where they try to like, they pull their swords and their weapons and they're like, it's Saruman, oh no, and they go to, and then but like Aragorn's sword turns into fire and all that stuff happens very similarly, and they drop their weapons and then they realize it's Gandalf. The movie just cut that beginning part with the like weird slow conversation and like the teasing, and just kind of hits the reveal right away. Although there is a little bit of the conversation, because they have the moment where he's talking and they don't know who it is, and his face, and the movie does a cool thing where they blur the elements of they have like Christopher Lee's eyes superimposed in a little bit, so even us as viewers aren't really sure what we're seeing, even though it was in the trailer then again. And if you've anybody who read the book, obviously we know it's Gandalf, but like in the moment in the movie they kind of keep it vague, and they mix the Christopher Lee and Gandalf's the actors, Ian McKellen's voice, they mix their two voices together back and forth, so we're not really sure what's going on.
It's interesting.
It works.
I don't know what this next bit means.
In the book, Aragorn's a dick about his sword. Somebody's gonna pick up his sword, and he's when he puts it in, when he gets to Edoras, and he sets it down outside, and when he leaves it because he can't take it into the hall, he tells all the guys around, if anybody touches that sword, they'll die because they're not the true heir of Elendil or whatever, and they'll be cursed and die because I'm cool and don't touch my sword.
Drama.
Yeah, like basically. And I again, he doesn't have Anduril yet, but once he does, he's not a dick about it in the later movies. I thought that was so, again, book Aragorn versus movie Aragorn.
Speaking of kind of book versus movie, I want to talk for a second about how much more I enjoy Legolas and his characterization in the movie. There are several times throughout my book notes where I just have Legolas, you ass, followed by a quote from Legolas where he said something dickish. And he does have some like zinger lines in the movie. But they all they come off as like teasing and playful and good natured. But in the book, at least to me, he kind of comes off as like a pompous dick. Yeah. So
I think the movie does a good job of taking that and making it less obnoxious, but still you can tell the movie, and part of it's Orlando Bloom. I think he just does a great job at playing that role, but you can tell he's teasing, but he's also means it. Like you can tell he's full of himself, but he's good enough at playing it as a joke that you don't get offended by it if you're you know what I mean? Like he's good enough at delivering an insult to you that you're like, I think he believes that, but no, he's joking. Like but he actually deep down, Legolas actually is a dick, but he's like good at being a dick, and everybody likes him for it. I think is what's going on there, and I think the movie does a really good job of that. Whereas it's harder to get in the movie, and I think or in the book because you don't have the performance with it,
right?
And also his lines are just different. So
yeah. So Gandalf's line when they try to take his staff in the movie, you wouldn't deny an old man his walking stick. There's a book line that's similar to it, but is not as good. Yeah. He says, would you part an old man his support?
It's more old-timey speak. Yeah. The old man, would you deny an old man his walking stick is more plain. Yeah. But it works. And Ian McKellen crushes the delivery. I like a little addition in that scene when they get into the hall, and then Gandalf starts exercising Theoden. I like it's a little that there's like a bunch of guards, which makes sense. I feel like Grima would have his coalition of people that on the take that are working for him, basically, who go to try to stop this, and are Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn to start bare fist knocking out everybody. And it's a fun scene because Gandalf's walking forward, and just in the background they're just running around beating the shit out of everybody.
Yeah,
it's I really enjoy it, and I forgot about that moment, and it's not in the book at all. It just kind of happens in the book, like he just does his little thing and nobody tries to stop him really. But I thought that was fun.
Theodred's funeral, also not in the book.
Yeah, because he dies in the book and it's mentioned, obviously.
But it's a nice solemn scene with the singing.
Yeah, where Éowyn sings a song, and it's a beautiful scene, and you get to see the flowers on the graves, which are mentioned in the book. And that's also an extended cut, the funeral part. We get to see part of that in the theatrical cut, like his body going in, and then Theoden talking about it, but the whole singing and everything was not in the theatrical cut. But I think it's a nice scene.
Yeah.
And it was not mentioned in the book at all, the funeral, really. They don't give Theoden his big rousing speech when he is excised. They save all his epic speeches for later in the movies. At Helm's Deep, and at the especially at the big one at the Battle of Minas Tirith in the Pelennor Fields or whatever. That big battle, they give him epic speeches in. I mean, Theoden really gets like the best speeches. Aragorn's got a pretty good one in Return of the King, but Theoden really, Ride for Ruin in the Gloria, shoot, I can't believe I don't remember it, but Ride for Ruin and something or another. But he has a speech in the book in this part, and it's like, okay, cool, I get it. And he yells Forth Erlingus, which is what he yells. That's like the Rohan call or whatever. But I just like saving the Theoden epic moments for more of them for later.
Yeah. We talked about Grima. They just let him run away.
He runs away, whatever.
Makes a little more sense than what happens in the book. A little bit.
Yeah. So in the movie, they just go to Helm's Deep because, and I think this makes more sense than the book. In the movie, they just go to Helm's Deep, and now they say it's not a good idea. Gandalf and Aragorn say going to Helm's Deep's a bad idea. They're just going to die there. But I don't know what their other options are in the movie, like what they want them to do. I mean, he says go call for help. Yeah. But he's like too proud to, and he's like, Gondor won't come. Nobody will come. Who will help us or whatever. But I thought it was interesting. So in the book, we talked about this. They're going to war. Gandalf shows up and says, Isengard, you need to go to Isengard and stop Saruman. And he's like, okay, let's do it. And he gathers all the people, him and Éomer and everybody ride out, and they're going to Isengard to fight. And then when they get there, they realize, or as on their way there, they realize they need to retreat because they're going to get overrun. They're not going to be able to stop. Yeah. Something happens. The army's bigger than I can't remember exactly what happens, but they have to retreat, and they run back to Helm's Deep. And there's some people already there who have been kind of hanging out there, and some of the villagers and stuff like that. I think it's just a little bit clunky in the book. Again, I can't even remember exactly why they retreat. And it's my own failing, sure, but like the movie to me just makes sense. We can't hold Edoras because it's not as it's a completely. I mean, it's a good, relatively safe fort. A small army, whatever. But it's not as good as this. As Helm's Deep is the complete, the best defensive keep in the world.
Out of a mountain.
It's literally hewn in the side of a mountain, and there's only one way in, and it's a big, strong wall of 10-foot thick rock or whatever, and it's the best fort in the world. It makes sense to go there and just. Because, the armies are coming, we'll get killed here, let's go to this fort where we'll be safe. Yeah. To me, that just makes sense. I get it, and it's not confusing to me. Whereas the book's a little like, okay, going to war, cool, well, now you're running away because you can't win the war because people it's because that's what it is. They're going, and then they're going to meet up with their, forward army. They have people that were already fighting, and then on their way there, that group is retreating to them, and they're like, a bunch of us are dead. There's no army. You're not going to reinforce anybody. We already got overrun. Yeah, basically, and then they retreat to Helm's Deep. But again, I just like the movie's version of it. Anyways.
Movie, Gandalf gives them a date and time for his return.
Yeah, he does.
Sunrise on the 5th day.
Look to the east. Yeah.
So we got some specific stakes there.
In the book, he goes, I'll be back. He's like, I'm going to go. Mm-hmm. I'll be back. And they're like, okay.
Great.
Hopefully soon. But in the movie, it is absolutely... in the book, he turns to them when they see that when the people are retreating. He turns to them and is like, go to Helm's Deep. You'll be safe. Just go to Helm's Deep. I gotta go. And they're like, if you say so. And then he just rides away. And they're like, whoa. And then, I like him being like, in the fifth day, looked at these. Also, for us, for viewers, we're like, okay, they just got to survive long enough. Gandalf's going to come save the day. We don't know what Gandalf's doing. I mean, we can guess kind of what he's doing. Because he says to Theoden, like, call Éomer back. And he's like, well, we don't even know where he is, blah, 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 whatever. So we can assume that's probably what's going on. But you don't know for sure. You don't know what's going to happen. So I just like that. We talked about the warg attack. Mm-hmm. There's a mention in the book. This isn't completely invented. There's a mention in the book that some of Erkenbrand's, who's a character who's not in the movie, we'll talk about it a little more here.
Because he had too weird of a name.
Yeah, we'll talk about him in just a second here coming up, and when we get to Helm's Deep. But he some of his people, his like villages, were being attacked by wargs, or one of them was attacked by a wolf rider army, and so they kind of just took that and made it happen to our characters, which it's a fun scene. I don't love the going over the cliff, but I like the scene. We talked about the Elvish archers. We can skip that. We've talked about that a lot, I think. Oh, but unless you had a point there, never mind. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, I agree with earlier points on that. But I do like that the movie utilizes the elves more overall. Yeah, because the book kind of just, with the exception of like Legolas, kind of just forgets about elves entirely.
Yeah, especially in this one, they're like, they're not even in it other than Legolas. I love this little shot in the movie that when they're talking, Theoden's walking through Helm's Deep talking about the defenses, and we get a shot pulling across the courtyard behind the wall, behind the deeping wall at Helm's Deep. And as they're talking about how impenetrable it is, the camera slowly pushes past them as they walk out of frame to the grate in the wall. And then Grima's voice fades in over it, and he says, there's the strongest fortress in the world, but there is one weakness, and it's pushing in on this thing. And he said, "There's a gate, or there's a sewer basically that runs through the." Anyways, I just think it's a cool shot, and it's very foreboding. Like it just feels like you're like, wow, they got this great badass fort, and you're like, oh no, what are they gonna do with that hole in the wall? It just really makes you be like, oh, I'm worried. I don't know what they're gonna do, but I'm not feeling good about it. Something bad's gonna happen. We talked about it. The throwing of the doors. It's the best. Open. Aragorn throwing the doors open as he gets back. Totally worth it.
We get a couple scenes that show like the gravity of the situation.
Yeah, which you don't really get in the book. Much.
Yeah. So we have the scene of like the old men and then all the young boys leaving their families to fight in this doomed war. Yeah. And then Aragorn's scene with the young scared kid.
Yeah, and he shows him, and he gets his sword, and he's like, it's a good sword.
So we kind of show him transitioning into leadership, and then we have the movie like playing up the stakes and showing us how unlikely it is that this is going to work out in their favor. Because
we get a couple really good moments that I think, talking about Aragorn's sort of character arc over the course of these movies, or right before this, a scene we didn't talk about, he's talking to Theoden. And he's like, Theoden's going around being like, yes, this is great. Yes, do this, do that. Talking to his men, like bolstering all their spirits. And Aragorn's like, you guys are fucking. He says something like, we don't have enough men or whatever. And Theoden turns around to him and was like, dude, what do you have me do? I know we don't have enough. I'm the fucking leader. I gotta make them think we can win. Like, and Aragorn kind of takes that moment, and then I think you can see that kind of transitioning. When it's his discussion with Legolas, where Legolas is like, we're all doomed, and Aragorn's like, well, fine, I'll die with them. And then the scene with the kid, where he has this moment with the kid where he gets to be Theoden, what Theoden was doing with his men of raising their spirits and making them hope. He turns around to this kid who's scared out of his mind, thinking he's gonna die, and probably did. We don't. I think he survives. I don't remember. I don't know if we see him again. But and I like that little the character beat turn for that with Aragorn of sort of transitioning and moving into his role and growing as a leader. I think is the themes of the movie. This line's not in the book. When the war finally comes, they're all on the wall, and Gimli is looking out or trying to, but he cannot because he's too short to look over the wall. And he's like, what's happening? What's happening? And Legolas turns to him and says, shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
A great dickish Legolas line.
Yeah, and that's not in the book. But I do love that line.
So we mentioned that when they use the secret door to ambush the battering ram, it is Aragorn and Éomer. But most importantly,
yes.
the book does not have the "you'll have to toss me."
You'll have to toss me. I cannot jump the distance. You'll have to toss me.
And I love the way Aragorn looks at him in that moment.
Yeah, he's like, what? I cannot jump the distance. You'll have to toss me. And then, don't tell the elf. Yeah, it's great. No tossing. They just kind of climb over there in the book. But yeah. In the movie, or in the book, there is an explosion that blows a hole in the wall, but it's not nearly as dramatic. The whole sequence is not nearly as dramatic as it is in the movie. I love... In the movie, the guy with the torch, the suicide guy running into the wall and leaping.
Yeah.
And the, Legolas, bring him down. He says it in Elvish. I don't know what he says.
The hardiest.
Havados or whatever.
Yeah. Because all the other ones get taken out with like one arrow.
Yeah,
but this guy's got like 7 sticking
From my memory of playing the video games, he was an Uruk-hai Berserker, is his class in the video games. Because they have several of these guys and they're hard. When you fight them, they're harder to kill than the other guys. But yeah, he gets several arrows in his neck, but that doesn't kill him. He leaps into the wall and it explodes and blows out a huge chunk of the wall. And it's this big epic moment. In the book, they hear an explosion and they look and they're like, what the hell was that? We don't know how it happened or why, it just happens. Because again, we're always kind of from the perspective of our protagonists. And there isn't a guy that leaps into it or anything. From my reading in the book, the hole that they blast is much smaller. They basically make the hole in the wall that at the bottom big enough for like people to come through without like crawling. Whereas in the movie, they blast like a 20-foot chasm in the wall, which obviously it's just cooler. It's a bigger moment than what sort of is described in the book.
Higher stakes.
Yeah. I just think the movie's more fun in that regard. Kind of in general, but
yeah. I prefer that it's Éomer and his people that show up with Gandalf as opposed to Erkenbrand.
So yeah,
we don't really know. Yeah, Erkenbrand.
In the book, Erkenbrand is the one who comes down the hill with Gandalf as the sun rises. But again, Erkenbrand is this guy in the books who we don't even know much about him in the book. He's like one of the wardens who's out. I assume he just is like kind of like Éomer or something, but he like governs his own people out in the far reaches of somewhere in Rohan. And he's like, one of their generals or whatever, or leaders. But we don't know who he is or why he's cool or whatever. So just make it Éomer.
Yeah.
Yeah. They banish Éomer. Gandalf goes and finds him, brings him back with all of his men. Perfect. It makes perfect sense. And it's a character we know and care about as opposed to some guy we don't know.
Yeah.
So... I much prefer that in the movie. I do like in the movie, which is not mentioned in the book, is when they come in the book, they come over there's like a dike at the end of the valley. It sounds like that Gandalf and his guys, and I think that's kind of what they're going for in the movie, but it feels like it's in a different place geographically in the movie than it is described in the book, but it's close enough. But in the movie, as they come down the hill, right as they get to the bottom, the sun crests over the hill, and it blinds all the Uruk-hai and orcs, and they all like lift up their spears, which they have all their spears there to like kill them as they come down. And that moment where the sun gets them, I think it's a really clever moment. It's not in the book at all. It makes perfect sense from like thematically with the sun and the light and Gandalf coming and the clever it sort of speaks to Gandalf's cleverness and him showing up at this moment and planning it this way. It also, again, like we said, symbolically with the light against the dark, and then also it's just like, oh, that's really clever. Like, because that actually seems like that would work. Like as the sun crests over, if it's been dark this whole time, and then they're hit in the face with the sun, it would disorient them to the fact where it would greatly increase your chances of successfully blasting through their line or whatever. I think it's a really brilliant little thing.
We actually get to see the Ent attack on Isengard, which we don't really get to in the book.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They go to war, and then we come back and they've won.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the book or in the movie, we get to watch them destroy Isengard.
Just end to wreck in hell.
Yeah, which is fun. And the little moment that's really great that I always laughed about, and you were laughing about it, is when the one that's on fire.
They release the dam,
Entwash,
and the Ent that is on fire just like bends over and puts the fire out.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. That whole scene is great. So we're now into book 4, which is the second half. We're going back in, I think, right? We're going back into. Yes. Yeah. We're going back into Frodo and Sam now for better in the movie. And this, we talked about this earlier and was that in the book, but I think it was incredibly smart and incredibly obvious to interweave books 3 and 4. Like I said, it's like, of course they were going to do that. You wouldn't make a movie where you did one whole storyline that's happening at the same time as another storyline and do them back to back. I get it. It makes perfect sense. But obviously, if you get the high and the epicness of Helm's Deep, and then you come back down and you watch Frodo and Sam wander around the dead marshes for an hour, it's like, okay. It's a little bit less of a problem in the books because if you read them as separate books, like he kind of intended, or as like separate episodes, whereas if book 3 is book 3 and we get that whole story and the climax is Helm's Deep, great. And then book 4 is its own thing, and then that all builds up to Shelob's Lair and that happens, cool.
Yeah.
But together, and the way they're sold with the 2 towers, the biggest, most interesting climax is halfway through the book.
Yeah.
Shelob's Lair is not Helm's Deep. It's cool, it's interesting, it's scary, but it's not Helm's Deep. And so, like, I just think it makes way more sense to interweave it the way they did, and then to move Shelob into into Return of the King, because if we had Helm's Deep going on, Isengard going on, and Frodo running from Shelob, running around in Shelob's lair all at the same time, it's a little too much. We get Osgiliath, there's still some tension and drama going on with Frodo, but it's not nearly the same level of like life and death, big action sequence that, or at least it doesn't feel like it is, that Shelob's lair is, because it's this big impending thing that they've been building up the whole book of like her and what and Gollum's going to take her there. I think it makes a lot of sense to move all that. I think it's just really smart changes by the movie to do all of that.
Yeah, no, it makes a wild amount of sense.
Yeah.
So we're at Sam and Frodo now.
Yeah.
So let's start out with the swamps.
They get into the dead marshes.
Yeah, the ghostly lights and the faces under the water.
It's all good, yeah.
This is in the book.
Yeah.
So, like, feasibly, we could put this in the movie, nailed it. But I do think it's, like, scarier and more intense in the movie.
Yeah. And the thing to me is there's a moment in the book where Sam mentions that he turns around and Frodo walks up to him and his hands are wet and he's, like, covered in slime. And then Sam sees like the dead faces in the water, but we don't know what happened to Frodo. And I think they took that and sort of, it's implied that he fell in the water or like fell over or something. I think the movie took that and amped it up by having Frodo kind of the ring call him and he pulls and he falls into the water. And then we get that scene with the ghosts coming up out of the water. It's just cool. And it just kind of expands upon what we get in the book of, because the book, it's just, they see those faces under the water. It's creepy. And then the movie takes it up a little bit. So there's a little moment where Frodo's laying on the ground in the dead marshes and he's like stroking the ring and touching it. And the movies just overall go harder. And we talked about this a little bit about how the ring affects Frodo.
Yeah.
And we get more of him becoming Gollum-like, which I think helps thematically with him and Gollum's relationship, because he can see himself so much in Gollum. And we get a lot of that throughout this movie of how he needs to believe that Gollum can be saved and why he's so attached to Gollum and wants to help him and wants and trusts him to some extent, is because he sees himself in that, and he's the ring bearer and Gollum was the ring bearer. And if Gollum can't be saved, that means I can't be saved. So, and the movie works that a lot harder. And I think I think it works really well.
I think the movie does acknowledge a lot more than the book does that when Frodo looks at Gollum, he's seeing his future potentially.
Yeah.
And that would be a tough thing to reckon with.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the movie just does a better job hammering that home.
Mm-hmm. I like a little change.
I think it's
where Frodo reminds Gollum that his name was Smeagol once. And that kind of kicks off the change that we see in Smeagol / Gollum.
Because in the book, he just kind of, once they release him, once they untie him, he just kind of starts calling himself Smeagol.
Yeah.
And kind of like becomes happy-go-lucky. But I like Frodo being the one who instigates that change in him a little more, like directly, and being like Smeagol, and he's like, oh yeah, and like again, Frodo trying to save this person because it is his future potentially.
Yeah.
So the Black Gate in the book seems way smaller and less cool. The movie in the book, it's like a big black wall with a normal sized gate in it. It seems in the movie it is a giant gate that is
massive
opened by trolls. That it's huge and epic and crazy.
Like overkill to the max.
It's just turned up to 11 from what we get in the book.
Also, for a place that no one is trying to get into.
Yeah, like nobody is. But it just feels better and more epic, especially because we know there's going to be a battle there.
Yeah.
In a book from now, making it this big epic place just makes a lot more sense to me. Across the mouth, this is the book description. Across the mouth of the pass from cliff to cliff, the Dark Lord had built a rampart of stone. In it, there was a single gate of iron, and upon its battlement, sentinels paced unceasingly. Beneath the hills on either side, the rock was bored out into 100 caves and maggot holes. There a host of orcs lurked, ready at a signal to issue forth like black ants going to war. None could pass the teeth of Mordor and not feel their bite unless they were summoned by Sauron, or knew the secret passwords that would open the Moranon, which is the Black Gate's name, the Black Gate of his land. So again, in it there was a single gate of iron.
Yeah, it sounds
there's no
pretty
description
normal.
of like how big it is,
Yeah.
or it's just there's a gate. It's like, okay. The movie's
Cool.
like, nah, man, there's a fucking gate.
The movie wisely cuts a not-so-brief history of all the plant life as Frodo and Sam are on their way to, is it Kirith or Cirith?
It's Kirithungul.
Kirithungul.
Is how Faramir says it.
Yeah, but we get like pages and pages and pages of like all of the plants that grow there, and I'm like, can we just...
Like, I get it. And again, I said I enjoyed some of that in the first book. And I did, and I still don't hate it, but it got a little tedious at times.
I think it wears on you more as the story goes on, because it's kind of like, okay, why are we still world building to this extent? To this extent.
Because there are moments where, like I said, when we were getting the description of the wasted, sick land after the dead marshes, I'm in it for that. I want to hear. And it's not super long. It's a paragraph or two. The plants and stuff, it's like pages and pages of all the things they see in the land. And it's like...
and the description of like the sickly land, that creates like an ambiance. A mood.
Yeah.
But all of like this plant life and all the different herbs that grow there, it's like, why are you telling us this?
Yeah.
Just say that there are plants growing.
Yeah. I agree. And I agree. It's just too much in the book. I like it, but it goes too hard, is my problem with it. Yeah. We talked about it, but boil and mash them, stick them in a stew. That's just in the movie, baby.
We make Boromir fun in the flashback.
Yeah, I just like a little bit more Boromir. He shows up in a flashback.
Yeah, Faramir has some remembrances
of when they took Osgiliath back from the orcs. But again, I like the scene because Boromir's there. Don't like Faramir's character because he's very much the jealous younger brother. Yeah, and it's
that second son syndrome.
Yeah, it's just so antithetical to Faramir's character in the book that, and again, we talked about it, but yeah.
I mean, his dad is a huge dick, so fair enough.
Yeah, but I've heard that that's also not so much true in the book. That Denethor isn't as much of Denethor as he is in the movie.
I remember very little about Return of the King, but we'll find out.
I liked getting to see Osgiliath though in the flashback, and when they get to Osgiliath, I don't love the going to Osgiliath thing because of the reasons we talked about with Faramir and all that stuff. But I do like getting to see it and see sort of the constant state of war that it's in. And it looks like bombed, and this is what their inspiration was, but sort of like bombed out like World War II city of like, you know, on the border between Nazi Germany and England, or you know, it's like it's the France, it's the bombed out border towns or whatever. But it's fun. It's interesting to go there and see that turmoil up close and the war that is taking place there. And it's also a nice setup for the next movie when Faramir is going to have to do some battles there and that sort of thing. So,
I don't love the whole thing with Frodo going up to the Nazgul and
it's all manufactured for the book, or for the movie, and I like elements of Frodo's succumbing to the ring, but this one in particular feels a little over the top to me, of him walking up and like going to put the ring on in front of the Nazgul and the Nazgul just staring at him. Yeah. Like, does the Nazgul not realize that he's holding the ring? Like, I guess
the Nazgul can't see.
They can.
I thought they couldn't, and that was why they sniffed everything.
They can see this. I mean, they chase people and stuff. They can see to some extent, I think. I don't think they can see well. I could have swore that they could see some, but it's like a weird shadowy seeing.
Maybe.
I don't know. You might be right. You very well might be right. I don't know. Anyways, that whole scene with the Nazgul flying in front of him and him like thinking about it's okay, but then Sam has to come save him, and it just seems a little too. Frodo's a little too far gone in this movie already. It seems like maybe he shouldn't be quite so taken over by the ring. But I do love Sam's speech.
So I don't love all that, but because of that, we get some great lines from Sam.
Sam has his moment in the sun, and I do love it. I mean, because he gives a great, inspiring Hobbit speech. It's not a Theoden inspiring speech. It's very different. But, you know, Sam, Sean Astin doing his, like, pleading, pure delivery is just so heart-wrenching and, like, uplifting about a new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clear, Frodo. You know, like, just all of that is... And the last line, there's some good in this world, Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. Yeah. It's so good. Like, it's just so good. And I love the speech. So, and that's not in the book at all. None of that. None of that's in there.
None of that happens.
So yeah, I like elements of it, just not all of it. Okay, movie nailed it. Let's go.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Aragorn and everybody gets to fight.
This is back again at the beginning. Back again at the beginning. The end of Return of the Fellowship of the Ring.
And we get to see Boromir's bravery in slaying all of the orcs.
And that is in the movie. What the movie nailed in this regard is that he does kill like dozens of them in the book and in the movie. Yeah. As he has arrows in him, all of that stuff plays out exactly the same in both. And he does to save the Merry and Pippin. That's all from the book, which is really cool. Then moving into Two Towers and the chase after the Merry and Pippin, Pippin does pull off his little brooch and throw it on the ground so that leave it as a trail so that
a clue
so that they can find him, like Dany leaving her ring in the. When she gets taken by the Dothraki.
We see you, George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, right. But he says, and the line is in the movie too, that this is from the book where Aragorn finds it and says, "Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall." Which, you know, sort of dramatic. That's a dramatic book Aragorn line.
Yes.
That still fits with Aragorn's movie character, but Aragorn in the book's a very dramatic fellow.
Yeah.
Very Shakespearean at times.
And the movie, I think, does do a good job of capturing, like, it montages it. It captures how endless the chase after the Uruk-hai is.
And Gimli really helps with that, with his constant, like, us dwarves are wasted over long runs.
Natural sprinters.
Deadly over short distances. But yeah, you can like the big helicopter shots of them running, and they mention that it's been days, and I think it captures it.
Yeah.
we talked about it earlier, but everybody does constantly ask Legolas to use his elf eyes, and the movie does include that specifically by saying elf eyes. But one of the lines in the books is "Keen are the eyes of elves," and they turned that into Legolas. What do your elf eyes see? So.
Rohan horses have braided manes.
They don't do that in the movie. I put this in here because I wanted to know if they did, and I don't think they did. I don't know. I was looking and I couldn't tell. In the book, the horses are specifically mentioned that their manes are braided.
Yeah.
And in this movie, I think they just have like normal unbraided. I put this in the movie, nailed it, because I was hoping it was right. And I couldn't remember, and that's why I wrote, do they have this at the end? But I couldn't remember, and I looked, and I don't think they do. If I missed it, and they do, then cool, but I don't think they do, which is disappointing.
Yeah.
Because I don't know.
Fancy horses.
Yeah, fancy horses. The meeting between Éomer and our three from the Fellowship is identical to the movie or to the book. Yeah. Everything where Aragorn walks out, "What news from the north, riders of Rohan?" All of that, and this whole scene, Karl Urban cast as Éomer and Karl Urban's amazing, anyways. But he crushes it as Éomer in this movie. I think is one of the most underrated performances of these entire movies, in my opinion. I say underrated. When you think of like all of the great like Gandalf and Sam and Aragorn and all these great performances, Éomer is probably not in most people's top 5, but like he crushes it in these movies. I think he just does such a great job capturing Éomer's essence and like his dark and like business-like demeanor, but also he's very fair, but like it's tough. Like everything about Éomer, I think they just crush in these movies. Like, and the line, "Give me your name," or Gimli, like, "Give me your name, horse master, and I will give you mine." All of these lines, and we talked about it, and was that in the book? But I would cut off your head if it stood a little higher from the ground.
Yeah. And then Gimli riding the horse
with Legolas. Yes.
Bros for life.
Bros for life. Groshnak does get killed by a spear, but he doesn't get killed. He gets up. I assume that's Groshnak, the guy who chases them and then gets stomped, the uber gross, mega gross orc. I assume that is Groshnak because that's his name in the book. And in the book, he gets killed by a spear. In the movie, he gets hit by a spear, but then lives, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's close, whatever.
Great Treebeard line.
Yeah.
It takes a very long time to say, and we don't say anything not worth taking a very long time to say.
Yeah, that line
which
directly out of the book.
True.
Very true of the Ents. And then going on from that, he has another one. "I am not on anybody's side because nobody is on my side," which is also right out of the book.
And we get the backstory for the Ents.
This is a deleted scene.
Yeah.
If you didn't watch the extended version, you don't get this in the movie, but it is in there.
Yeah, we find out the old elves, way back when elves woke the trees up and taught them to speak.
And that's where the Ents, not where the Ents came from, but the trees learning to speak.
Yeah.
Because that couldn't be where the Ents come from, because supposedly Treebeard's the oldest living thing. Maybe I guess it could be. He could have existed as a tree.
Yeah.
Before anything else.
Yeah.
And then eventually elves came along and taught him to speak. And then he was still the same tree. Maybe? I don't know. Whatever. Not going to get into it too much. The Treebeard does carry around the hobbits, just like he does in the book.
Sit up on his shoulders.
Branches. And at times he does carry them too.
Yeah.
They do both, which is what happens in the movie and the book.
Aragorn and Legolas sleuthing out what happened to our hobbit friends.
The only slight difference is in the book, Legolas tries first and is like okay at it, but not great. And then he's like, "Aragorn, get in here. You're the pro at this." And Aragorn comes in and is like, "Pretty good job. But he's like, "All right, Watson, you did okay." And then Sherlock comes in and really, really nails it. This first line isn't in the book or isn't in the movie, but it's great. But the second part of it is when they go and they meet Gandalf and they're talking to him and they try to attack him. And at one point he says, "You have no weapon that could hurt me now." It's just like a badass Gandalf line. We talk about this where he has several lines like that. Like, "This foe is beyond any of you," like that sort of thing. Just Gandalf knowing he's a badass. But he does have the line, which is an epic line. It's in the trailer. "We meet again at the turn of the tide."
Yeah,
it's right out of the book.
Then the battle with the Balrog we discussed. pretty shot for shot.
Yeah. They fall into the water. They battle down in the water. They make their way all the way up the staircase to the very top of the mountain, and they battle on top of the mountain, and he smote him on the mountainside. Smited, whatever.
Smoten.
Edoras is pretty much spot on from how it reads in the book, being on this mountain or this hilltop with a wall around it and the Hall of Marasil or something like that, whatever the hall is that's on top. When you see Edoras, it's one of the most striking set pieces in the movies.
Yeah.
And it is what you imagine when you read the book. At least to me, because it's set right in front of the mountains, at the foot of the mountains, which is where it is. It's perfect. Old ass Theoden. I think he's pretty good.
Yeah.
From what we get in the book of this old, he's like bent and old and gray, and his beard hangs down to his lap, and all of those things is how he's described in the book, and it's how he looks in the movie. And I think the whole confrontation between him and Gandalf and Grima Wormtongue and all of that, the line, "Your courtesy of your hall is somewhat lessened of late, Theoden," right out of the book. A great line. I even think Gandalf revealing himself with pulling, he throws his gray robes off. That's all in the book. And Grima being like, "I told you to take his staff." All of that. It's a lot of that scene plays out pretty similarly.
Yeah.
It's more dramatic.
Yeah, exorcism is a little more dramatic. But I do like how the movie gives us that scene of like Saruman being like pushed back out of him.
Yeah,
too.
when he slams him the final time against the chair, and then it cuts to Saruman flying back is cool and really drives home what was going on there. And that's not really, it's a little more subtle in the book, which works in its own way. But in the movie, it's like, bam, he's like, magicking the shit out of him. And then he has him pick up his sword because perhaps your fingers would remember their old strength better if they grasped the sword hilt. Just little line. I just like all the dialogue, and I just love when they're right out of the book.
Let's talk about Eowyn's thirst for Aragorn.
She's so thirsty for
a little
Aragorn.
More. Because it is in the book.
Oh, yeah.
But we get the extra scenes with them in the movie, which is nice. And that horse scene.
Yeah.
Like... I mean, Eowyn is the OG horse girl.
Truly.
So, like, come on, Aragorn.
Yeah.
Why are you teasing her?
Yeah, right? She's sitting there watching as he, like, fucking calmly
like,
talks in elfish to a horse. Okay, man. Cool. Great. Leave some for the rest of us, dude. Jesus. I think everything about Helm's Deep, the way it's described, everything, the wall in the movie, the description in the book is it's a 20-foot tall wall. I think it's slightly taller in the movie, probably like 40 feet tall. But the way the wall curves around at the front of the thing, and then you have the keep on one side with the wall, the higher wall over there, and the ramp up to the gate. All of that is exactly how it's described in the book. It's like it jumps off the page. They even mentioned that the walls at the top of the wall are pretty tall, which is where I think they got the description. They say it's tall enough for a man to look over.
Yeah.
Or that there are parapets that are tall, that are just short enough for a man to look over, which when you then extrapolate from that to Gimli standing on the wall, he would not be able to see over it, which is where they got that joke from. But...
the line, most of them have seen too many winters or too few.
When they're assessing their army that they have.
Get that right out of the book.
As the battle starts, the lightning and the rain start, and they do fight in the storm.
That is a great moment in the movie.
It's better. This could go in better in the movie because in the movie you get it's just so perfect in the movie. In the rain, in the book, it's like, and then the skies opened up, lightning struck, and rain started to fall. But in the movie, you get that shot of Theoden standing there, and the best moment, you hear the tink, 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 as it starts to fall on their armor, and you're like, one more thing.
I know, and his face is just like, all right,
this is about right. Yeah, it is. That could go in better in the movie. It's exactly what happens. It's just the movie elevates that with the way it's shot and everything.
And then we get the battering ram under the
coming
shields.
Up under the shields up the ramp.
The shield ceiling.
Yeah. This is a huge one to me that I was not expecting to be in the book. and it absolutely is, and the movie nails it, is that Gimli and Legolas have a competition where they count how many orcs and Uruk-hai they have slain. If you would have asked me, pick, top 5 things that are movie additions, that would be one. I mean, the Legolas sliding down the shield would be like number 1 with a bullet, but like number 2 would probably be them counting and like going back and forth and joking about how many Uruk-hai they've killed. But no, that is absolutely from the book, and the numbers they use are like identical throughout. Yeah. Like Gimli's like, that's 2, and Legolas is like, I'm on 17 or whatever. It's exactly how it plays out in the book.
The ladders up the wall.
Yeah, they climb the wall with the ladders. And then after they start getting they blow up the wall and everything, they start coming into the courtyard, and Aragorn retreats the same way in the movie, and he holds that staircase that they use to get up to the keep. That's described exactly the same. Aragorn stands at the foot of the stairs as people are retreating and like holds back the Uruk-hai for a while. And then they finally all get back inside and they get all the way into the keep. The only difference here is that in the book, Theoden is like, let's ride out.
Yeah.
In the movie, Aragorn says, ride out with me.
Yeah.
I get it, because Aragorn's our protagonist. Mm-hmm. It feels cooler for him to
feels cooler, works with his kind of character arc in this
being the leader
film.
and that sort of thing. But it's just a slight change. But they do decide to ride out basically because one of the things that's not in the movie is that after they break through the wall, a lot of their forces get pushed back into the caves.
Right.
And that's where Gimli ends up.
Yeah.
And so they want to ride out to help draw the army out and to pull them away from, which is kind of what they say in the movie about how get the people to retreat into the caves and then we'll ride out, so that give them time basically to run away.
Yeah.
But in the book, they're already like being attacked at the caves, and so they're going to ride out. But anyways, it's pretty similar. And one of the lines that's very similar is Theoden says, "We shall make such an end as will be worth a song." It's different in the movie, but we shall give them such an end or something like that. And then they blow the horn of Helm's horn, whatever, Hammerhand's horn. In the book, it's not Gimli. Yeah. Or at least we don't know who it is. It could be. No, he's in the cave, so it can't be Gimli.
But they blow the horn.
And then they ride out, which is exactly how it plays out in the books. And they just go crazy, ride through everybody. Gandalf shows up, slightly different. We talked about it. Kills, boom, they're victorious. And then the army retreats. Mm-hmm. And they run. And this is only the extended cut of the movie. But the Uruk-hai run away into the forest that has magically appeared. There was not a forest there the night before. But now there is a forest sitting at the edge of Helm's Deep. It has moved there overnight. It is Fangorn Forest, and it's there for revenge. And the Uruk-hai run into it and disappear, and never to be seen from again.
Crunch, crunch.
Crunch, crunch. I always thought that was interesting. The forest shows up and murders all the orcs.
Yeah. Gimli beats Legolas by 1.
Legolas says 42, and Gimli's like, well... Or no, Gimli says, I had 43, and Legolas says, I had 42. And it's implied that he may be... In the book, it's implied that he may be lying because he was super worried that Gimli died. When Gimli gets overrun in the courtyard and then ends up in the caves, he's like, oh shit. He's like really worried that Gimli died, and he's like his best friend. So to me, it feels a little bit like it's implied that Legolas may be lying because he's so happy to see Gimli alive that he's like, I'll let him have this one.
Bros for life.
Yeah, but then in the movie, he is a dick and shoots a dead one already and says, now we're tied or whatever, which is a fun little moment. But then we come back to, for the final time,
back with Frodo
and Sam. And there's an opening shot. It's not the opening credits. I think in the theatrical cut it is, but in the extended cut it's not. Or the opening where it says the two towers, where they're looking ahead into Mordor, and that description is like straight out of the book to where it felt like they just painted the page onto the screen, and it was like it really struck with me of how similar it was to what I remembered the shot of them looking into Mordor looked like. The hobbits stood now on the brink of a tall cliff, bare and bleak, its feet wrapped in mist, and behind them rose the broken highlands crowned with drifting cloud. A chill wind blew from the east. Night was gathering over the shapeless lands before them. The sickly green of them was fading to a sullen brown. Far away to the right, The Anduin that had gleamed fitfully in sunbreaks during the day was now hidden in the shadow, but their eyes did not look beyond the river, back to Gondor, to their friends, to the lands of men. South and east they stared, to where, at the edge of the oncoming night, a dark line hung, like distant mountains of motionless smoke. Every now and again, a tiny red gleam far away flickered upwards on the rim of earth and sky. Again, just that red, fiery distance glow of Mordor.
The line. That's the one place we don't want to see any closer, and it's the one place we're trying to get to.
Yeah, Sam's line. Yeah, that's absolutely out of the book. We talked about the magic untying rope, but they're able to yank it, and it just comes untied, and they're like, oh, cool.
Right out of the book, except for Sam's wholesome swears.
Yeah. Gollum crawling down the cliff looks exactly how it's described in the book. And the book is described of him looking like a spider crawling down the cliff face.
Like crawling down like a sheer cliff face.
Yeah, like face first like a spider. And then the way he falls, and then Frodo pulls Sting on him and says, this is Sting, you've seen this blade before. All that's right out of the book.
Do the way Gollum moves in general. Yeah. Like the way he walks on all fours.
Yeah, and hops around and moves. And everything about Gollum.
Skulks.
Everything about Gollum is pretty much perfect, including the split personality, which the movie does play up a little bit. Yeah. But it's in the book. It's not as like... I thought maybe the movie like almost completely added the back and forth.
The movie doesn't invent that out of whole cloth, but they do amp it up a little bit.
Yeah. This is Gollum. Once by accident wasn't it, Precious? Yes, by accident, but we won't go back. No. Then suddenly his voice and language changed, and he sobbed in his throat and spoke, but not to them. Leave me alone, Gollum. You hurt me. Oh, my poor hands, Gollum. I don't want to come back. I can't find it. I'm tired. We can't find it, Gollum. And they even talk about in the book that the light in his eyes changes as he between like a green and a pale blue light or something. Yeah. And so that idea of like the split personality isn't it. I had thought and heard it made it sound like that's not at all in the book, and it feels very much like it is. They just overtune it a little for the movie. The fish song that's in the book when he catches the fish to catch a fish so juicy and sweet. All of that there's a whole song of it. It's not super long, but
it's cute.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
It's cute.
He's not banging it on the rock in the book, which is a fun little addition where he's like banging it musically while he's singing. But the song is from the book. And to mention the fact that the closer they get to Mordor, the more the ring is weighing on Frodo. That's described in the book. Again, the movie plays that up even more. Yeah. But it is an element of the book that they're definitely pulling on.
And Gollum debating himself.
Yeah.
Which we've touched on. And this gets moved to the end of the movie.
Yeah. Where he's going to take them.
Yeah, about where he's going to take them, and like this hint of like, oh, she could help us.
Yeah.
She could do it.
Yeah. Because he wants the ring, but he doesn't want to kill him.
Right.
But she can do it.
And they move that to the end, which makes sense, but it is like a very similar the way it plays out.
The only big difference is that Sam overhears this in the book.
Yes.
Which kind of increases his suspicion of Gollum, but yeah. Master said, bring us to the gate, so good Smeagol does so, which is, he just takes him to the gate, and you're like, well, why didn't you tell us there was a better way? He's like, you didn't ask me for a better way. You said, take me to the gate, so I took you to the gate, all right?
Potatoes.
What's taters, Precious? Taters, eh? Yeah, we talked about it. That's right out of the book. Them hearing the whistles of Faramir's men and not knowing what it is. When they see the evil men marching, that's right out of the book. They're like, I thought I heard some whistling. I don't know. Didn't sound like birds. And then the fight between Faramir and the men, including the part where one of them gets shot and falls right in front of Frodo and Sam. Yeah. That happens in the book, and it's like exactly the same. And an Oliphant runs through, and Sam's super excited about seeing an Oliphant. And then a little moment that I'm really glad, this is only in the extended cut, I think. Yeah. But it's a huge moment. It's the only moment that gives us a bit of book Faramir, in my opinion. Is in the movie and in the book, Faramir, after he shoots that guy that falls near them, he walks over and he looks at him and he says, he's basically like, was this man actually evil? Did he want to be here? Did he want to leave his home? Would he rather not be at home with his family? Is he truly evil at heart? It's sort of a discussion on the idea that, we're fighting them because they're here to fight us, but He's not like an evil man.
They've
like,
got their own motivations. And
yeah, which is, I think, a very interesting idea. And I really like that Faramir has that. Faramir would be the person to contemplate that because we know his motivations. Again, book Faramir would be a person to contemplate that.
Yes.
Book movie Faramir, maybe less so. But I at least liked that it was in there to give us a little bit of that outside of Faramir.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the movie also has the boat dream scene with Faramir.
Yep. And they do ask when Gollum shows up, that all plays out very similarly, where Faramir's like, should we shoot him? And Frodo's like, no, wait, don't. Yeah. And then he's like, I'll go down and get him. And then Gollum gets grabbed by them and is like, oh, no, you lied to me. And Frodo feels super terrible about it. All of that is exactly out of the book. The only difference is that Gollum, when Frodo comes up on him in the book, Gollum is saying things about, like, throttling everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie, at this point, he's like transitioned into good Smeagol.
Yeah.
In the book, he's still a little bit evil, and he's like, I'll strangle them all. And then Frodo's like, hey, bud, maybe don't.
And ultimately, Faramir does do the right thing.
Yeah.
Lets them leave. So that at least is the same in the book.
At least a little bit is the same, but it's still not quite. It's not my Faramir. Not my Faramir. Get that trending. I'm gonna get the shot of him strangling Gollum and not my Faramir. Or looking longingly at the ring. Not my Faramir. All right, that's it for Movie Nailed It. We're gonna do a few odds and ends and then get to our final verdict. Okay, we're so close.
Ooh. I love when I started reading this, I was immediately like, you can tell that Tolkien wanted this all to be one giant book because this one jumps right into the action instead of starting with 20 pages of background information. Yeah.
Again, the way that it's written, as we talked about, and the way it's split up makes no sense from a 3 books standpoint.
Yeah.
With this action scene being at the beginning of this book, with the Boromir's death action scene being at the beginning, and then Helm's Deep being in the middle of this. None of this makes any sense as a book by itself, like in terms of layout. But as one big book or as 6 individual tomes, kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I really had to take note of how many alasses were in the book.
There are a lot of alasses.
And I was like, because I don't think there are any alasses in the movies.
Probably not nearly as many. I think there's a couple.
Maybe a couple. But I was wishing that we had done a count.
Yeah.
It's starting out with Fellowship.
How many alasses are there? You could probably, if we can get the digital text, you can just command F alas. Let's see. Do you remember the old forest by Buckland is a line that Merry says in this movie, and it's nope.
That wasn't in the first movie.
Yeah, that's the scene with the tree that they get trapped in.
Yeah.
in the first book, not in the movie, but they mention it. There's a line where in the book where Treebeard says that Gandalf is the only wizard that really cares about trees, and I'm like, bro, what about Radagast the Brown? He's like
not in these movies.
No, this is a book line.
Wait, this is a book line?
This is a book line. This is a book line. This is not in the movie. This is on page 466 in my version. I have an all 3 together version.
More like an animal guy, maybe?
Maybe, but it still strikes me that he might care about trees a little bit because he's like the nature dude.
Yeah, fair
I don't know. It just seemed weird to me that was... I was like, man, what, Radagast? No? Okay, fine, whatever. In the movie, Saruman has a line where he goes, "The old world will burn in the fire of industry." It's like, all right, movie. We get it. We get your theme, but a bit on the nose.
Well, you can't have an idyllic pastoral fantasy land if it's not being threatened by the specter of industrialization.
True. It's just the movie's here is the theme! And the books, it's a little more subtle, but whatever.
I love Mary's face at the beginning of the Entmoot.
Yeah.
When Treebeard's like, we must decide if the Ents will go to war. And Mary's like, hell yeah.
Yeah. Dope.
I also, this did not come up in the movie,
No.
I don't think.
No.
But in the book, they talk about how Endstrides.
Yeah, how many Endstrides
how many
Treebeard has
Endstrides they travel. And I propose here in America that instead of converting to the metric system, we should convert to Endstrides.
Yeah, sure. Be pretty imprecise for smaller things, but sure.
We could do end tiptoes.
Yeah.
And shuffles.
And then shuffles, yeah. No, that's fair. I like this. Somebody come up with whatever the translations. Figure out Treebeard is 14 feet tall. Figure out what the gait of a 14-foot tall person would be. Divide that up into so that's an inch stride is probably whatever 10 feet or something.
Yeah.
And then an inch shuffle is like a quarter of that or half of that, and then an tiptoe is like a tenth of that, and just figure out what all those distances are. We'll make our own measurement system.
That's more math than I can do, so somebody else could just get on that.
Yeah. Oh, so then we get some yikesies from Tolkien.
Some yikesies.
Some big yikes from Tolkien and the movie makers. Yeah, and honestly. The movies. So there's a line in the book where Gollum, somebody, I don't remember who it is, said, no, it's not Gollum. I don't know. Somebody says, further southeast, the men are fierce and have dark faces.
Yeah.
Implied that they're like savage. Yeah. And then they have dark faces, and they're not fair like the rest of us. And it's a geesh.
And then in the movie, we see them, and they're pretty clearly coded, like, generically Middle Eastern.
These are the men of whatever, the evil men that show up that ride the elephants. Yeah. And it's I mean, it's not like the movie made this up. They're very clearly coded this way in the book as well, with the elephants and dark faces and all that. But they're very much Middle Eastern or even like India, Eastern sort of coding on them that is definitely problematic.
Of the Orient, to use another problematic term.
For your bad guys. And again, especially because in the books, I mean, now to be fair, there is a little bit of pushback with Faramir's character in that moment, because it is one of those characters where he goes, is this man's heart truly evil? Implying no, like not really. Yeah. Like he probably doesn't want to be here. He's here because somebody told him to come here to fight for something that he doesn't care about. You know what I mean? Like implying that they're not actually evil, but they're still, that being said, all of the bad guys in all of these books and movies are orcs, or they're like Eastern men, like some sort of vaguely Eastern, dark-skinned, swarthy people that like wear like headdresses and lots of like gold and it's not great.
And then our other yikes kind of things, and it's similar.
Yeah.
Too. There are a couple occasions in the book where the orcs call each other apes. Yeah. Which is yikesy-wikesy.
Yeah.
And then that gets further complicated, I think, by the movie that arguably codes at least the Uruk-hai as black.
It does seem like it, for sure.
I mean, I would need to, I think, delve a little more into that, because I'm not super well versed on like racial coding. Yeah, but I feel like a lot of them have kind of like, it looks like dreadlocks or braids, and
well, it is all of the enemies, all of the evil people in the movies and in the books. Not all of the evil people, because there are people like Saruman, there are people like Denethor that are evil. So not all of the evil people, but most of the evil hordes of the evil enemy are, all coded in non-white ways of some sort. Because, I mean, and there was a big discussion about it on the internet, and we're not going to get into it right now, but even, the discussion about orcs and whether or not, just in general, the idea of orcs and the coding of it as... the savages, this uncivilized, it's all very problematic, and it is worthy of discussion and research that we haven't done, but plenty of people have. So you go read about it and don't. I think we would both ask is to not if you enjoy these movies and these books, which we do. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're doing a whole series about them. Is to not just dismiss that criticism and go, the orcs are what? That's not that's stupid. What? No, they're just the bad guys. What? Like, just think about it a little bit.
But think a little bit critically. And, you know, similar to some of the stuff that we talked about, like with Harry Potter, I think when you love something, that means that you will take a look at it unflinchingly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it does, again, we said it a million times, because something can have those problematic elements and can be super yikes to some extent, which I think definitely the sort of wild Eastern men that are like, clearly, it's definitely like not great. I think it's just think about it, take a look at it, and go, maybe there is some, maybe it's not a great idea for all of our fantasy to code all of the bad guys as the other dark-skinned people.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's not a great thing.
So maybe that's something that we can learn from and do things differently as we move forward with storytelling.
And you can come back and be like, well, actually, Saruman's really white. He's Saruman the White, and he's evil. So, like, okay, like, we get you. Just think it's not an end-all be-all. It's not a. It's just a think about it, bro. Think about it. Reconsider your biases. Then in Gondor, they mention talking more about J.K. Rowling potential inspiration, and I'm sure this goes back in all kinds of myth and whatever. But they specifically say Faramir or somebody in reference to Sauron says, "He whom we do not name."
Yeah.
Which
and the idea of naming something and names having power, that does
it's not a Harry Potter thing.
Stretches way back into
But just specifically that, it's just like these people talking about the great evil and being like, he whom we do not name. It's like, again, with Dementors.
You mean Voldemort?
Dementors and ring wraiths and Butterbeer and Butterbur, all of these things we talked about. There are definitely some elements that you can feel pulled from one to the other. In the movie, the Ring of Barahir is mentioned, and it's something Aragorn's wearing, but that's not in the books at all yet. Maybe an appendices thing, or maybe a Return of the King thing. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out.
But Saruman talks about the Ring of Barahir, and we see it on Aragorn's finger, and it's like the Ring of the King, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I just wanted to mention that. And then Elrond has a really mean-ass mortality talk.
Yeah.
In the movie. It's not in the book at all. But he's just like, I know it's such a weird scene, and I know people don't like movie Elrond compared to book Elrond. But in the movie, he's just like...
He's like, Aragorn's gonna die.
Aragorn's gonna die, and you're gonna be miserable. And you're gonna live out your days alone and miserable because you'll be mortal, and that's the worst thing you could possibly be. It's just like, okay, man. Chill.
Okay, but also, like, maybe I'm a little bit confused about how that works. Because, like, if Arwen marries Aragorn, does she become mortal?
In the movies, that's implied. In the books, I think that would not be the case.
So can she not then, like, after he dies, can she not then
go to the Grey Havens? I don't know. I think the idea would be that if she were to marry a human, she would then, like, forfeit
her
right or something, maybe. At least in the books. In the movie, there's a line I feel like I super remember where Arwen says, "I choose a mortal life."
Yeah.
Implying that she will die. But Elrond in this movie very much implies she won't die, so I don't know.
But maybe, like, she dies, like, eventually?
Yeah, like a long time later.
Yeah, because then they show it, and, like, he's old and dead, and it seems like she's still young.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Very confusing lore here.
I don't know. But that's it. That's all of our odds and ends that we want to talk about. Let's hit the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
There are parts of this book that I enjoyed, like, much more than Fellowship of the Ring. Most of book 3, and I'm saying book 3 in terms of books 3 or 4 and 4 are what make up the two towers. Mm-hmm. Most of book 3, all of the Helm's Deep stuff is super well done, and it's fun to read. It's engaging. It goes by really quick. It's awesome. Book 4 is a bit of a slog at times, and overall, I think Fellowship works better as a whole, like, on its own book. With the way it flows, because we don't get two separate stories that then one of them restarts after the second one, going back in time, or after the first one. So I think Fellowship just works overall as a better story than Two Towers does split up. And I think the movie makes an incredibly smart decision, an obvious decision, to switch back and forth so we don't have that weird split that the book has. So it switches between the Frodo and Sam story and the Broken Fellowship story and goes back and forth essentially chapter to chapter, scene to scene, relatively speaking. This really helps the narrative of the movie, moves it along, and keeps the pace much more enjoyable. This movie also definitely starts to make bigger changes than The Fellowship did. The end storyline is altered pretty severely, like we talked about with them deciding not to go to war versus going to war in the book. Faramir is a completely different character. We visit Osgiliath, Frodo confronts a Nazgul, and in a reverse of Fellowship, one of the final action climaxes is moved into the next movie. So in Fellowship, they moved it from the next book into that movie. In this book and movie, they move it into the next movie. All of these alterations feel like they fit the overall narrative to me, and I can absolutely see why they made all of the changes they did. I will say that the change to Faramir is probably the biggest thing so far in this series that I can understand why it upsets book fans, if it does, which I'm sure it does to some extent. I really, really like Book Faramir, and I could completely understand anybody who watched this movie and was like, felt like they did a disservice to their Faramir. Again, hashtag not my Faramir. That being said, I think you could easily make the argument, again, that Peter Jackson, his writing crew, and everybody who worked on these movies should be studied anytime somebody wants to set about adapting a dense series of novels into a movie series. One good step, as an aside, is to make each movie about 4 hours long. That's one good way. If you make a 4-hour cut, it's easy to include lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But they wrote the book on this in terms of doing a great job, in my opinion, adapting these dense, winding, lore-heavy stories into 3 films that make coherent sense and include all of your moments that you want and change as little as possible. So again, I'm going to have to give this one to the movie for the second time. This movie really does capture all of the best moments of the book for me. It Helm's Deep, the Ent battle, which we don't get to see in the book, Frodo and Sam's journey, Frodo falling under the ring. My only complaint is Faramir, really, and that storyline, where that goes. It's really my only complaint in terms of adaptation, but I also understand it. It weaves them all together in a way that kept me interested, even more so than reading the book this time, for sure. And it still manages to hit all of the major themes that the book is going for, developing the ring and the battle for the ring and the struggle between good and evil and the journey that they're all on. And I think the movie just does a fantastic job and is thus a slight improvement on the book.
All right. I enjoyed this book more than I did Fellowship. It's a little bit faster paced, at least in book 3. Book 4, like you said, a little more of a slog. But despite having more action overall in the book, there was still a lot of talking, a lot of walking, and a lot of unnecessary description. And then the recaps. We are always with the recaps here. Every time we reunite or we run into someone new, we have to recap the entire story up to that point to that person. And here's the thing. I've been reading the book. You don't need to recap all the time because I've been reading the book. Like, I get that it's logical within the world of the story to do this, but it's not logical when writing a book because I, the reader, already know. I know what happened. Just say that they shared their stories. I know what happened. I was there, Tolkien. I remember. And that's largely why I'm going to give it to the movie. Similar to how I felt about Fellowship, I think the movie considers the audience more than the book does.
Absolutely.
And eliminating issues like the constant recaps, like the pages and pages of history, and the description that just doesn't really add much to the story. I think that results in a more coherent narrative, one that can be followed without losing the meaning and the theme or the audience.
Boom! Roasted, Tolkien. Roasted. Got him. Yes, so we agree. Once again, the movie is better, but only slightly. Again, this is not to the extent that our last summer series, where barring 1 or 2 of the movies, the books we thought were just resoundingly. But the movies are still pretty fun and good movies, but they're not great adaptations.
Yeah.
They're just okay adaptations or good adaptations at times.
These are great adaptations.
They're great adaptations, but the source material is also fantastic.
Yeah.
Unlike, let's say, Ready Player One, which I thought, again, the movie wasn't great in that regard, but I thought it made vast improvements on the book. This one is not vast improvements on the book. It's just very smart, small improvements on the book that make it a more overall enjoyable piece of work.
It's smart tailoring choices.
Yes. Which is what when you're adapting, that's what you're freaking doing. So good job. All right, that's it. Before we get to our next little tease of what's coming up, I want to remind you that if you could do us a big favor, rate and review us on any of the places you download us. Primarily iTunes is the best one, but anywhere else you download us, if you can rate and review us there, do us a favor and do that. Also, if you can share us out, if you like our show, tweet about it or post it, share it on whatever, just put it out there in the world. If you're really enjoying this Lord of the Rings series, I know it's a big ask for time for people to listen to a 3.5 hour episode about Lord of the Rings, but there are people out there who are into that sort of thing. Because I'm into that sort of thing.
We appreciate you.
Yeah.
You're our people.
I'm into that sort of thing. I don't mind myself a 3-hour podcast if it's going to be about something I'm interested in. Hopefully this was interesting for you. We're having a lot of fun talking about them like we did with Harry Potter. But they are epic and long, just like the books and the movies. That being said, do us a favor. Help us out. That would be great. Thanks. Katie, what is up next?
All right, so we're going to have another breather, so we have time to read Return of the King.
Yes.
And potentially the ensuing appendices.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do next is actually a listener's choice. And we're going to give you guys 3 options to choose your favorite Dr. Seuss adaptation.
That's fun.
So our choices are The Cat in the Hat. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's
I've not seen any of these.
Cat in the Hat, The Lorax, or Horton Hears a Who. Now, we're not including The Grinch because that's a Christmas movie, so obviously we want to save that for Christmas
sometime.
So Cat in the Hat, Lorax, Horton Hears a Who.
Okay.
So polls will be up later today on Facebook and Twitter. Twitter will be an actual poll. Facebook will have to be one of those things where you choose a different reaction image to vote because Facebook is super dumb and doesn't allow more than 2 options on a poll.
Nifty.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so stupid. But
I don't
whatever.
know whose idea that was, but I want to throttle them like Gollum.
So, reminder, if you want to vote, which we encourage you to, go and check out our Facebook or our Twitter page. We also are on Instagram, Goodreads, and Reddit, so you can find us on any of those social media platforms. But Facebook and Twitter is where we'll have the polls up.
Yep. So vote, make your voice heard. We will be doing whichever of these books gets the most votes cumulatively across all social media platforms. If you want to comment on like Instagram, we'll count that too.
Yeah.
We'll count
Makes it less easy. But.
Yeah. And then we will announce the winner on Sunday.
Cool. Sounds good. And just to clarify, you don't have to vote for your favorite of those books necessarily. You can just vote for whichever one you most want to hear us talk about, which may very well be The Cat in the Hat, because I've heard it's not a good movie. I've had people request that on Good, Bad, or Bad. So that one would be interesting. But any 3 of those, Cat in the Hat, The Lorax, or Horton Hears a Who, go let us know what you want to hear us talk about. And that's it. So until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else, I want to say a little something. We missed it in Pride Month, and I meant to say this, but I want to say it here. If you're a person out there and you're questioning or you feel unsure about yourself in any capacity about anything, I want you to know, and I think Katie agrees with this. I know Katie agrees with this. I think.
I don't know what you're about to say, but I agree.
You'll agree. If you're a person out there who's unsure or questioning about any aspect of your life, I want you to feel like this is a safe place for you. Our community wants to be a safe place for you. I meant to say this, like I said, at the end of Pride Month, or in our Pride Month episode, and I just forgot to. But know that you're accepted here. You are a part of our family, and that we love you. And that, again, we want to extend a community of safety and love on this podcast. It's a big part of what I like about the communities that you can create with podcasting, with media, with things like this. And we don't have a huge listener base, but there are probably people out there who have those feelings about whatever. And again, I'm not trying to be, I don't want to be specific because there's so many different things that could apply. But if you ever need to talk or to reach out, not that we're going to like counsel you, but or nor are we qualified. I just want to make it clear that this is a safe space for you. So, do you co-sign?
I do agree with that. I co-sign.
Cool. Anyways, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else,
keep reading books
keep watching movies, and be like Éomer. Be like Éomer.
And Faramir.
And book Faramir. Be like Éomer and book Faramir. And be awesome, that's the point.